ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ यथाग्निर्दहिकशक्ति रामकृष्णे स्थिता ह्य सर्वविद्यास्वरूपां तां शारदं प्रणमाम्यहम्। Oh, I bow to that reality, Shiva, and I bow to that reality, Shakti, who is inseparable from Shiva. She is manifest as all knowledge. She is Kālī, Tara, Shodashi, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chinnamastaka, Dhamavati, Bagala, Matangi, Kamala Devi. She is inseparable from consciousness the way heat is inseparable from fire. I bow at the feet of that incarnation, the embodiment of all gods and goddesses. Om Paratatve Sadalino Ramakrishna Samagyaya Yo Dharma Sthapanarato Viresham Tam Namamyaham Viresham Tam Namamyaham. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Gurubhyo Namaha. I bow to my Guru. And I bow to Swami Vivekananda, that great hero who establishes the dharma by his master's command. He is ever absorbed in the non-dual absolute. May this be an offering at his lotus feet. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Jaima, Jaima. So last week we had a long and beautiful discussion, I think, about where Ma Kālī came from. And we wanted to track the development, as it were, of Ma Kālī, who is ancient and timeless and beginningless and endless. But all the same, we wanted to track the development of Kālī and the worship of Kālī throughout the ages. And we wanted to ask, how is it that this very esoteric tantric worship and tantric deity, which was for a long time known to only a very small band of practitioners, how is it that she somehow made it into our homes and into our hearts? How did Kālī come to California? How did that happen? That was a story that I thought would be interesting to tell. And obviously it's a very rich and complex story. So we only skimmed the surface last week. Although we talked for 2.5 hours, I think. We only barely scratched the surface, the tip of the iceberg, if you will. In any case, there's obviously more to be said about that, but I won't talk about that today because what I want to do instead is, having discussed where Kālī came from, we can take stock of where she is now, which to some extent we did last week. Also, just looking around and seeing where is the goddess movement as it stands in 2025 as we're now talking about it. Where are we and how far we've come? That's the conversation that I wanted to have last week. But today I want to have a conversation about where we're going, where we're headed. So while last week was somewhat retrospective, today I want to look forward a little bit and ask certain questions. I want to ask, what's to be done, as it were? What's the calling? What's needed, or in what way is the Divine Mother moving us to act? Because Mayra Devi had asked a very beautiful question actually last week at our Friday satsang. Mayra had said, well, you've talked about where Kālī has come from, but maybe you could share a little bit about where you think she's going. And then she asked something very sweet. She said, but what's your personal mission, or rather, what's this community about? I'm paraphrasing a bit, but essentially her question was, what are your ideals and your plans? And of course, naturally, I laughed and I said, we have none. We're just doing whatever we want in the moment. And we argued that there wasn't any real desire for any specific outcome. After all, Swarupam Twadiyam Navindanti Devaha. Not even the gods can understand her true nature. She's inscrutable, and her actions are totally self-willed and happen for no reason whatsoever. Because after all, theologically, think about what you're saying if you're saying that Mother acts out of reason. The moment there's some reason for God to do anything, God is no longer free. Because the moment there is a reason, there is a because, you see. If I can say, oh, I went to the kitchen. The reason I went to the kitchen was because I was hungry. What does that word because imply? There is a cause. The cause, called hunger, led to the effect, me getting up and going to the kitchen and making a sandwich. That was not a free act, although it felt like I freely got up and I freely went to the kitchen and I freely chose what kind of bread I want, whole wheat and not white. I freely chose what kind of vegetables I want, maybe extra jalapenos because I like very rajasic and spicy things. I freely, in my mind, chose all of those things. And then I'm the one who freely ate the sandwich, freely on my couch, which I feel all happened in freedom. But in truth, the whole thing, the sequence of events that led to me sitting on the couch eating the sandwich was caused by something, by hunger. So I can't really say that that was a free action. It was a caused action. Similarly, if the Divine Mother Kali had something to gain from any action, if she desired something, or if she conversely feared something, I mean, what fear can there be there for Kali, who is the terror incarnate? But if she did something out of desire or out of fear, then she would no longer be free. That would not be a free action. It's an action with a reason. And any reason means because. Because means there is a cause. And cause means Kali is an effect. And if Kali is an effect, then something is acting on Kali. That's incoherent in the theological sense. So Kali just does whatever she wants. She's absolutely free. So who knows what she's going to do next? Who can say? Not even the gods understand her nature. And because of that, not even the gods can anticipate her next step. So naturally, the response I gave to Myra on Friday was something along the lines of like, I don't know, let's see what happens. She asked, what's the future of the lineage? And my response naturally was, Myra is the future of the lineage, or Asha, or Jyotima, or Natalie, or whoever, like anybody who comes into this lineage, who takes this practice up, they are necessarily the future of the lineage, and who knows what will happen through them? Who knows what Ma will express as Veera Nata, or as anyone, as Colleen, or as Chris, or who knows what Ma will do through you. So you can't really say where we're going, because it could be anybody's guess. And that's kind of exciting. That being said, though, I was saying to Myra towards the end of that discussion that I do have a sense of what I'm inspired to do. Like I have some ideas for where I think we could be headed, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about them today. So having discussed where we've been and having discussed to some extent where we are now, and maybe I'll say a little more about that today, I want to discuss where we're going, if you don't mind. So kind of like a mission statement, if you will, like the ideals and values of our community, and I guess some vision as to what we're working on, if you will. We'll put it in those terms. In any case, the way I want to approach this is threefold. First, I want to talk about why Tantra is so secret. A while ago, we had given a set of lectures, 2 lectures in all. The first one was called Why is Tantra Secret? And the second lecture was called 7 Reasons Why Tantra is a Secret. And so the second lecture develops ideas from the first lecture. So taken together, those 2 lectures make a strong case for secrecy, to argue why in many cases this secrecy is actually quite helpful and desired. By the way, give me 1 second. Let me just go and grab the computer charger. Sorry, 1 second. Otherwise, Ma Kali will devour this computer. So 1 second. Okay, so yeah, where were we? So I want to make a case, and we did make a case, right? Like for why we thought Tantra should be secret, because this was in response to a lecture I had given just before that, arguing why superstitions can be very dangerous. Where there is a lot of secrecy, you usually get a lot of mystery mongering, a lot of superstition, which weakens the mind and which opens people up to all manner of abuse, to all manner of manipulation. So I made a case against secrecy in one lecture. I think that lecture was called How to Perform the Best Tantric Ritual and Overcoming Superstitions in Tantra. That was the name of that lecture. And the week just after that, I gave the lecture, Why is Tantra a Secret? Just to kind of mitigate a little bit some of the stuff I had said a week before, to give a more balanced, more holistic view. So I developed this idea over the course of 2 lectures, like 7 or 8 reasons. I think we got up to about 7 reasons, I think, for why it would be good to make this stuff somewhat exclusive, why that's important. But then I want to develop today another idea. So the first thing I want to do is review those reasons for why it would be good to keep Tantra secret. But the second thing I want to do is I want to go over like why this can be very problematic. Because we'll see how in the atmosphere of secrecy, problematic things can arise. And I want to address some of those problematic things in order to make a case for what integrity looks like in spiritual life. But we won't do this alone. We'll take the help of Swami Vivekananda. So the third thing I want to do, the main thing I want to do is I want to read to you from Swami Vivekananda's lectures on Sri Ramakrishna. Because in these reflections called My Master, Swami Vivekananda spells out what it looks like to be a spiritual teacher of integrity. And he spells out what it looks like to be in spiritual community with integrity. So there are some like ideals, very high, very lofty ideals that were important to Swami Vivekananda that he saw demonstrated in real time in the person of his master, Sri Ramakrishna. But interestingly, this lecture called My Master, which appears in volume 4 of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, is not necessarily about Sri Ramakrishna, the person. I mean, yes, it is. It talks about Sri Ramakrishna more than in any other place he's talked about him. But it's more about principles. And that's what Vivekananda has always ever been interested in. Principles, universal principles that can be applied by anyone, anywhere in the context of any tradition. So really this essay, this set of lectures called My Master is so special because it tells us what ideals a spiritual teacher should hold themselves to and what ideals a spiritual community should hold themselves to. And it's really nothing short of the highest. And that's why I want to read to you from My Master. One thing I'll say here now, before we get into any of this material, is this. Swami Vivekananda came here in 1893. So 31st May, he left the shore of Bombay on a boat headed to Vancouver. And through Vancouver, he came to Chicago, where he was interested in staying for the Parliament of World Religions that was convening in September that year. So there's a whole wonderful story about this. And of course, around September, early September, I'll tell you that story. But for now, the most important thing to know is this. He gave lectures that changed the world. Obviously, he was the first, in one documentary, he was called America's First Guru. He was the first person to present these ideas to the Western audience and to the world. His message was essentially the harmony of all religions, which was new at the time, by the way. When he was speaking on the platform of the parliament, most of the people who were there were, unlike him, preaching a particular sect based on a particular person or a particular doctrine. Everyone was there representing their own unique religion, which necessarily they felt was the best way to approach God, or the only way to approach God. Whereas Swami Vivekananda, unlike all the other delegates on stage during the parliament, he represented all religions. He spoke for religion, capital R. He gave beautiful lectures on Vedanta in all of its phases. Although he was particularly predisposed to Advaita Vedanta, and although that's what he would be made popular for, Advaita, non-duality, he still spoke on the other phases of Vedanta, dual Vedanta, dualistic Vedanta, qualified non-dualistic Vedanta. He represented the whole spectrum of the teachings of the Upanishads based on the great masters like Madhvacharya and Ramanujacharya and Shankaracharya and whatnot. He taught the doctrine of karma and reincarnation, and he gave very beautiful ideas about theodicy. After all, if there was no past life, then why is it that some people should be born crippled and other people born healthy? Why should some people be born materially rich and other people materially poor? Why should some people be born intellectually rich and others intellectually impoverished? What accounts for that difference? Does God arbitrarily decide to start some person at this part of the racetrack and this other person at that part of the racetrack? Well, how would you justify that? Even if ultimately they get some beatitude or something in a future heaven, that still doesn't justify why, in the beginning, no one starts on an equal footing. But if you have the theory of karma and reincarnation, all that becomes more explicable. It's no longer God who causes a person to be crippled or a person to be impoverished. It's not God who causes a person to be rich or a person to be intelligent or musically talented. It's merely past actions. The accumulated tendencies of the past are expressing themselves in the present, for better or for worse. So this idea of karma and rebirth and reincarnation, these are doctrines that are common to all the competing schools of the Indian subcontinent, except maybe Charvaka, Indian materialism. But yeah, right? Ruth is saying this has never made sense before, but that's the thing about Swamiji. He would make sense of things that never made sense before, and sometimes you just need to hear it from him to really get it. So this was his languaging around karma and reincarnation. So he thought Vedanta and all of its phases, dualistic, qualified, non-dualistic, and non-dualistic. He thought karma and reincarnation. He taught the idea of like image worship being a necessary support for the accessing of a deity that was inconceivable. So he made a case for idol worship or image worship, a very important defense in the face of Christian missionaries who were trying to tear all of these things down in India. He defended the Indian subcontinent and all of its diverse religious practices from the misrepresentations and the caricatures that were made of it by Christian missionaries at the time. So his work was very dynamic, but he never mentioned Sri Ramakrishna. You know, he never spoke of his own guru. He, as the foremost disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, was obviously expected to say something about Sri Ramakrishna. But there at the Parliament of World Religions, speaking to an audience of like thousands of people, and these aren't just like, I don't want to say like the public. These are the upper elite academic and intellectual circles of the time. That means these are people who would publish books, who had major influence over huge sections of society. So what you said to them, you would effectively be saying to far more people than just the ones gathered in the room, because they were the movers and shakers of society, the leaders of East Coast American society, Midwest American society at the time, if not national society as a whole. That being said, If Swamiji were to say something about Sri Ramakrishna in front of all of these people, he would get the furthest possible reach for the life and teaching of his master. But he decided, instead of putting before them Sri Ramakrishna as a person, he would just channel Sri Ramakrishna and teach the principles without becoming bogged down by any particular sect or any particular person or any particular tradition. He just spoke as universally as possible, using only principles as his guiding light, not persons. You see, religions are typically about persons. Very rarely are they about universal principles. Religions can be very exclusive because it's my book versus your book, or my person versus your person. So it's kind of like a Pokemon battle. It's my Pokemon versus your Pokemon. The last thing Swami Vivekananda wanted to do was to introduce another Pokemon in the arena. Well, there's Jesus, there's Buddha, there's Muhammad, there's Krishna. Now here's a Ramakrishna. Let's see who will win. That's the last thing he wanted to do. He didn't want to start a new religion or a new sect. In one place, he said, the world has had enough of sects, sectarianism. I don't mean to start a new sect because everyone should be a sect unto themselves. So there's nothing wrong with sects, by the way. There's only something wrong with sectarianism, which is the feeling that my sect is exclusively right. In any case, Swamiji didn't want to propose a sect of his own in order to empower everyone in each tradition that they found themselves in. So he never spoke about Sri Ramakrishna. And that was at the Parliament of World Religions. Then after that, he went on a whirlwind lecture tour throughout America. Like he was working with the lecture bureau who worked him tirelessly, giving lectures many, many times a day, sometimes over the course of the week. He was exhausted by the end of all of this. So he had so many opportunities to talk about Sri Ramakrishna, but he never talked about Sri Ramakrishna. He gave beautiful lectures on Krishna, on Buddha. He gave wonderful lectures on the Muslim rule in India, on Mohammedanism, and on the Prophet Muhammad. He gave wonderful talks on the Christ. But Jesus Christ, do you think he could have mentioned Ramakrishna once or twice? But he didn't. He almost never talked about Sri Ramakrishna. And we should ask why. Obviously, we've already presented one reason, which is because he didn't want to put another Pokemon into the arena. He didn't want to make it about persons or about sects. He wanted it to be as universal as possible. He wanted to stick to the principles, which he felt were universally empowering to anyone, anywhere, in any tradition. In one place, he said, it's not that the Hindu or Buddhist should become a Christian, nor is it that the Christian should become a Hindu or Buddhist. My purpose is to make Christians better Christians. When once he was asked in an interview, are you here to make people Hindu? He's like, God forbid the Christian become a Hindu or a Buddhist, because each one is a sect unto themselves. So that's a remarkable idea. And that's why he was so popular, because of this Catholicity, this Catholicity, yeah, because of this broad-mindedness. He was the only one who didn't have a horse in the race, if you will. And he spoke for all the horses. He spoke himself hoarse for all the various horses that were in the track. But importantly, he had many chances, not just at the Parliament of World Religions, where he was speaking to the world at large on the world stage. That was one of the most widely reported events of that year, by the way. Like great journals like the New York Herald and Chicago Tribune were avidly reporting on the Parliament of Religions. And not only that, in India, publications in Kolkata and in Madras and a very important Indian journal at the time, Indian Mirror, were also publishing about the Parliament of World Religions. And a very important intellectual at the time, Henry Barrows, he published a book called The World's Parliament of World Religions, which made this thing a historic event. So you'd imagine that this would be the time to say something about Sri Ramakrishna, to tell the world about the advent of the new incarnation, right? Except that wasn't Swamiji's thought. He didn't intend to do that. Instead, he spoke about principles. So he went far and wide, all over America. He gave these lectures. And then when he quit the lecture bureau because he found that they were extorting him and that they were abusing him, when he parted ways, he started giving lectures in New York just to anyone who would come. So in 1895, 1896, he rented out an apartment in New York with his Jewish roommate, Leon Landsberg, who later became Swami Kripanandaji. And so they would just sit there and have their lives in the apartment, and he would give a lecture in the morning, he would give a lecture in the evening, and people would come by the hundreds. There was nowhere to sit. They would sit on the armrests of chairs, and sometimes the room would be filled to overflowing, so people would sit on the steps outside, or sometimes people would be downstairs straining to hear him speak. So he went to houses and spoke in private settings. He spoke at Unitarian churches, and he spoke a lot out of the apartment that he rented with Leon Landsberg-ji. But never did he really mention Sri Ramakrishna. He would sometimes allude to Sri Ramakrishna. He would say something about an old man or a mad Brahmin, or I once saw someone who, he would talk about Pavari Baba every now and then. But very rarely was the name Sri Ramakrishna on his lips. except on two occasions. Once in 1896 in New York, he said some things about Sri Ramakrishna, and on another occasion in London, he also publicly said something about Sri Ramakrishna. So these two public talks on Sri Ramakrishna have been merged together into a single work called My Master. So remember, these are both from 1896. One was given in New York, one was given in London, but now you'll find them both merged together in volume 4 of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, and it's just called My Master. And so I want to read that out to you right now. So one reason why Swamiji didn't speak about Sri Ramakrishna was because he didn't want to make a personality out of him. He didn't want to start a cult or a sect. But not just that. It was also the case that he didn't feel like he was worthy, which is really interesting. You would think that Swami Vivekananda, as the foremost disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, this cyclonic monk, the hero at the Parliament of World Religions, who was beloved by the East and by the West, who was a great yogi who had attained Nirvikalpa Samadhi so many times, who had seen so many visions of gods and goddesses, who was of an absolute infallible moral character and purity, you think he would be the most qualified to talk about Sri Ramakrishna. So he once wrote to Girish Chandra Ghosh, a fellow disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, in a letter, I forget dated when, but he said something like this in that letter. He said, it would be like, he said something like, I would make a caricature out of him. And he gave a sculpting metaphor. He said, say I wanted to sculpt Shiva out of clay. If you're a poor sculptor, instead of getting Shiva, you might end up getting a monkey. So he said that's what would happen. Colleen is like, that might happen. But yeah, like he said, I don't want to make a monkey out of Shiva, a caricature, a distortion, because there's nothing really I could say about him. So that's how much reverence and how much love he had for Sri Ramakrishna. So a point that we're going to make when we start talking about the secrecy of Tantra is as follows. Sometimes things are secret because they're sacred. They're not secret because you don't want other people to know about them. They're secret because they're so intimate, so sacred, that it would feel kind of out of place to present them to the public. Just like you wouldn't go from your bedroom to the streets and talk about all the intimate things that you did with your lover. Just like that, maybe you wouldn't want to talk about all the experiences that you've had with God. They're so personal, so sacred, so intimate, that you couldn't speak about them even if you wanted to. And maybe you just don't have the words because they're so profound that if you tried to speak about them, you would profane them in a way. Not just because of intimacy and sacredness, but because they cannot be understood in the mind or through language. And if you tried, you would make a monkey out of Shiva, or you would miscommunicate and others might misunderstand you. So even if you tried to say everything out in the open, chances are nobody would even know what you were talking about, because these sorts of things cannot be spoken about or even thought about. And that's one of the reasons why he couldn't speak about Sri Ramakrishna, because he understood Sri Ramakrishna. Those of us who understand Sri Ramakrishna, like Swami Vivekananda, seem to be very silent about him. Those of us who don't, like myself, seem to talk about him a lot. You see. So not only Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda and Sarada Devi too. She who was so accessible to everyone, Swami Vivekananda usually felt quite timid and frightened to enter into her presence. You know, this lion of a man who was never afraid of anything, who would face the brutes and who would jump into the mouth of the cannon for the sake of his mission. This man would quake in his boots when he approached the demure and very modest and very sweet Holy Mother Sarada Devi. There's one incident where he's on a boat with some of his brother disciples on the way to see Holy Mother across the river, and he's like drinking Ganga water. And his brother disciple is like, wait, you'll get sick. Don't drink the Kolkata Ganga water like this. But he's drinking the Ganga water because he's trying to purify himself before he goes and sees the Holy Mother. Because he knew who she was. She's Kālī. Kālī disguised as this Bengali housewife. And he knew who Ramakrishna was. And Ramakrishna is not a person. He's that absolute, which is called Avang Manasa Gocharam, that which is beyond Vak, beyond Manas, beyond speech and beyond mind. So that's one reason also why Sri Ramakrishna was not mentioned in Swamiji's public lectures. Yes. So he didn't want to talk about Swamiji didn't want to talk about Sri Ramakrishna because he didn't want to make it about his person. And for this, he was heavily criticized, by the way. Many people back home in India, including some of his brother monks, who were, of course, to the very end, from the very beginning, loyal to him and loved him intensely. They too were getting worried. People were like wondering, why isn't he talking about Sri Ramakrishna? Has he become an individualist, an iconoclast? Is he breaking away from Sri Ramakrishna to establish his own lineage? Or is he corrupted by Western ideas? Is he just gone? Has he gone astray? Does he have his own ideas and now he wants to like start something new that Sri Ramakrishna never taught? And this was a fair criticism because a lot that Swamiji said seemed to contradict what Sri Ramakrishna said, unless you looked very closely at what was said. Sri Ramakrishna said a few things, and it was left to Swamiji to interpret them and present them to the world. So to this very day, there are people who love Vivekananda, who don't really like Ramakrishna or Sarada Devi. And then there are people who love Sarada Devi and Sri Ramakrishna who don't really vibe with Vivekananda. I'm a Vivekananda boy. So I love Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, but for me, it's Vivekananda all the way. Come hell or high water, I stand with Swamiji. Like, even in the case of if I had to try, I'll go with Swamiji always. He's made me his. I'm a slave totally to Swamiji, and Swamiji alone, you could say. Sri Ramakrishna, I don't understand. But Swamiji, I live and die for him. So anyway, in any case, I always say the interpretation of Sri Ramakrishna that is most authoritative, and of course I'll say that, the disclaimer is, I'm very committed to Swamiji, is Swamiji. I'll say Swami Vivekananda was the one to interpret Sri Ramakrishna, but many people disagree with this. They think that Swamiji had some ideas that weren't really there in Sri Ramakrishna that might have been unique to Swami Vivekananda. Western ideas, if you will. Now, that being said, Swamiji was criticized for not speaking about his guru Sri Ramakrishna. Be that as it may, he didn't really like to speak about Sri Ramakrishna for all the aforementioned reasons. Because Sri Ramakrishna was something beyond his comprehension, because he was worried to make a monkey out of Shiva, to make a caricature or a distortion of something so sacred and so intimate to him. And thirdly, because he didn't want to put a personality in front of people who were already so bogged down by personalities and sects and sectarianism. Okay? So having said all of that, I hope you can appreciate why this reading is particularly special. It's special because nowhere else does Swamiji talk about things like this. They're quite sacred and quite intimate. But even then, like I said, he doesn't just talk about Sri Ramakrishna. He gives us many, many profound ideas about what spiritual communities are like, about what good and healthy reform looks like, and how we can stay safe in a world where there are self-interested teachers, in a world where there are spiritual communities without integrity. Swamiji lays down some foundations for practicing spirituality in a sustainable and safe way, in a meaningful way. And they're very high ideals, by the way, but they're worth reflecting upon. So let's do that. Let's start with Swami Vivekananda's. Mainly I want to read Swami Vivekananda's My Master. Let's start with this. Let's start with 7 reasons why Tantra should be a secret. And then from there, we'll start developing the idea why this can also be problematic, why secrecy can sometimes be problematic. So let's start with this. 7 reasons why Tantra should be secret. And as Veera Nata is pointing out in the chat, YouTube agrees with me because that was the last video we uploaded on the old YouTube channel before we got banned. And by the way, that video was called 7 Reasons Why Tantra Should Be Secret and The Secret World of the Kālī. And naturally, I used a picture of Ma Kālī in union with Lord Shiva, and that was a bit too much for YouTube's nudity policy, and that was that. So it was funny because the point was well taken, I guess. Ma was like, yeah, you're right. This stuff should be secret. And then she took down the YouTube. Yeah, nice try, Ma, but here I am. I'm still making the videos. Swamiji said that, in Kashmir, he said it's necessary to fight Mother herself. If even Mother were to come, I would fight her. He said that in Kashmir. He wrote a letter to some disciples, or to brother disciples, I think. And he was trying to start a center in Kashmir, but he was being opposed by the government, by the British government at that time. And he was having a lot of frustration in Kashmir. The work there was stalled. And so he wrote back and he's like, he wrote to an American, one of his American disciples. And he said, look, and the American disciple is saying, why are you so mean to all your brother disciples? Why are you scolding them all the time? And he said something like, look, if they don't want to fight, it's okay. The only thing is I don't want them to get in the way of my fight. I will fight. Even if the whole world stands before me, rifle in hand, I will fight. Even if the gods come, even if the demons come, if hell comes, I will fight. If Mother herself comes, I will fight. He has that sentiment. So anyway, so why is Tantra a secret? First reason, most important reason arguably, is because practices aside, the theory, the philosophy of Tantra requires a very mature mind to be properly understood. Because if you don't understand these philosophies rightly, they can often lead you down a very spiritually degrading path. So these philosophies require a subtle and refined intellect. And the story that we gave in that lecture some weeks back, I think is kind of important. It appears in the Chandogya Upanishad. So a demon, Virochana, and a deva, Indra, both approach Brihaspati, right? Earlier we were talking about Brihaspati, Jupiter, or the guru of the gods. And so they both approach Brihaspati for Upanishadic wisdom, the highest truth. They want to learn the absolute. And so the first thing that Brihaspati tells them is the body is the absolute. And they both go home, and Virochana is delighted to hear this. He's like, my guru told me that body is the highest reality, that one should live only, and he concludes from that one should live only for the pleasures of the body. So Indra goes home, and he takes this teaching home with him too, and he thinks, How could the body be the absolute? Isn't the absolute that which is unchanging? But the body clearly changes. The body is young and then it grows a bit older and then it becomes much older and then it dies. The body is a changing flux of sensation. How could this be the absolute, which is the unchanging eternal reality? So Indra does this sort of reasoning, whereas Virochana doesn't. He doesn't reflect upon what he's heard. In fact, he comes up with his own conclusion. And his conclusion is, so therefore we should party on, Wayne, party on, Garth. And he turns to all of his demon friends and he teaches them this philosophy and they live a materialist life of hedonism, which is fine, by the way. But it's not a very deep teaching. And if you follow a half-baked philosophy, you might not get the kind of fulfillment that you know you really want. So like that's what happens when you live a materialistic life. It's good for a while, but there's only so much chocolate cake you can have after all before you start craving something deeper and more meaningful in life. So an asura, arguably, is one who thinks that the body and that the pleasures of the body is that which is most worth seeking. Whereas Indra, demonstrating a daivika intelligence, daivika buddhi, a divine intelligence, reasons based on what he hears. And so he goes back to Brihaspati. That's an interesting thing. He goes back and asks a question. Virochana doesn't do this. Virochana is content with what he's heard. He's complacent with his knowledge. But Indra goes back and Indra asks, Gurudeva, you told me yesterday that the body alone is the highest reality, but I found out that the body is changing. But isn't the absolute reality unchanging? And Brihaspati was like, very good. You've gone deeper. Now the highest reality is prana, energy. And just like that, Indra goes home and thinks about it and realizes that prana also cannot be the absolute reality because prana is always fluctuating. Sometimes I'm energetic, sometimes I'm low energy, sometimes the breath is deep, other times it's short. So he goes back to Indra and again he goes back to Brihaspati and again he's told by his guru that no, actually it's not energy. Something even deeper is there called the mind. And he reasons about this and again he goes back to Brihaspati and finally he comes to this conclusion. It's not really the body, though it's not the body. It's not really the energy, the prana, though it's not that. And it's not really the mind or the intellect either. And it's not even the void. So like this, deeper and deeper, Indra inquires into the ultimate nature of reality and he comes to the final conclusion that I am pure non-dual consciousness. Now, if he like Virochana had just stopped at body, he never would have gotten deep into the teaching. He never would have realized the ultimate truth. Brihaspati is a good guru. He teaches people based on where they are. So according to the story, you can learn that we don't move from error to truth. We move from truth to higher truth to higher truth to even higher truth. So somebody who hears tantric philosophies for the first time might totally misunderstand it. And they might get the wrong idea, and that might lead them down a spiritually retarding path, if you will, a spiritually debilitating lifestyle. So that's one problem. If we present this philosophy to just anyone, there's a high chance that we will be misheard, that some kind of miscommunication will happen. And so that's not very responsible to present something that people might misunderstand and then misuse. That's one reason why Tantra is secret, because its philosophies are so hard to understand, so intricate. But philosophy aside, we know Tantra is not all about philosophy. It's mainly about practice. In fact, Tantra kind of looks down on philosophy a bit. It obviously values philosophy, but it much prefers practice. It says, do the method and find out for yourself. But the practices of Tantra are also really powerful. And we gave an example in that talk some weeks ago, if you imagine that you're biting a lemon, like remember we gave that visualization, you're going into your kitchen, imagine your kitchen, you're going into your fridge, you imagine your fridge and you open the fridge door and you feel that blast of cold air. Then you reach into the vegetable drawer for a bright yellow lemon and then you pull out the bright yellow lemon and then you cut the lemon and now you can see how the juices are sort of pouring out of the lemon and then you take your lemon half and slowly bring it closer to your mouth and you can like smell the fragrance and then imagine in your mind's eye you're biting down on the lemon. Is that interesting? Most of us start to salivate if we're really following along with this visualization. Because you can see how glandular, hormonal, electrical, neurological changes can occur by just visualizing stuff. Now, what do you think is going to happen if you just visualize the color red for a long time or visualize a downward pointing triangle or something like that? Well, something is going to change on the level of your physiology. We already can see how visualization and biology or physiology are not that distinct from one another. I mean, that's kind of the science behind the placebo industry, I guess. The mind has a tremendous influence on the body. It's just not yet fully studied. Well, Tantra has studied it. And so Tantra presents very complex and very refined modalities to literally play around with genes and stuff, with glandular secretions, with the flow of blood, with the flow of electricity throughout the brain. And this is just on a physiological level. There's a whole other level of experience that we don't really even know about in the Western sciences. And that's the pranic level, where it's about nadis and the flow of subtle energies, if you will. So Tantra works on that level, and its practices can be radical and radically transforming. Therefore, if they are not done with the proper guidance, with the right parameters, sometimes we can get a bit of a reaction, which is all right. It's just that if we do get such a reaction, we wouldn't really know what to do or how to address it if we don't have someone to go to. So that being said, you can imagine somebody learns about electricity or something, and they go and they take a graduate course in electricity. And Natalie Ma and I were talking about this at the lunch table the other day. But it's like, let's say they don't really believe in electricity. So they're there, they're hearing all these talks, and they think it's interesting and all, but they don't really take it seriously because they don't believe in energy or electricity. So they're told, don't stick your wet fingers into the socket. And then they're like, yeah, whatever, electricity isn't really real. So then they stick their wet fingers in the socket, and then who's to blame when they get electrocuted? It's not that the electricity punished them. It's not that Ma Kālī is smiting them and punishing them because she's not pleased with her puja. I don't think that's the case. God is ever loving. God is love incarnate. It's not that. It's just that if you walk down the steps in a funny way, you might fall and hurt yourself. If you microwave tin foil, as I did once, because I don't have that much experience around microwaves, you're going to get a result. Maybe a flash of lightning and your room smelling like smoke for the rest of the week, and a scare that you could have almost burnt everything down. Like, you don't know what's going to happen if you tinker and play around with a tool that you don't really understand. And so you can get reactions. Some people get horrible insomnia, they become very hungry, they become very aroused, they become destabilized, they have dissociative episodes, all because they chant mantras that they find on the internet, and because they don't have the proper guidance or the proper person to go to when something goes bump in the night. Like, when you see something strange, who do you call? Ghostbusters, but also your Gurudeva, hopefully. And ideally you have one. You have a Gurudeva, you have a lineage, you have a tradition, you have a community. These are all important parameters for serious practice. So most people are okay because they don't do serious practice. They just dabble. And because they're dabbling, they're protected by their own lack of interest, by their own dilettantism. But some people, they're willing to go deep into something. And if they're going to go deep into it, they might get a reaction. And that's why this stuff is kept secret, because nobody wants to take responsibility for giving somebody something that will cause them to come to grief. The karmas are heavy. So therefore, people are careful not to just hand out these techniques and these modalities that can create very strong reactions in the practitioner. A third reason, though, is if this stuff is kept secret, you're more likely to approach a living human teacher in order to be able to access Tantra. And so it just necessitates a guru, which will solve for problems 1 and number 2. Right? So like problem number 1, misunderstanding the philosophy, can be corrected if there's a qualified guru to guide your thinking and point out incorrect understandings, which is the guru's dharma to do so. And of course, the guru should be very gentle. The guru shouldn't say, you're wrong, this is what's right. The guru should say, you're right, but have you also considered, that skillful teaching? Like Brihaspati demonstrated in that story from the Chandogya Upanishad. He just taught to the student, and he carefully guided the student from what they already know to what they don't yet know, in this beautiful, masterful process. See how Sri Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita? These are master teachers. See how Sri Ramakrishna plays intellectual chess with whoever's sitting in front of him? That's why there are so many contradictions in the teachings of Buddha or Jesus or Sri Ramakrishna, because they were expert teachers, masters of psychology. So they adjusted what they said to meet the needs of the person standing before them, In any case, an expert guru, a qualified guru, a person who at least knows what they're doing, is required, because that will protect you from a misunderstanding of the philosophy, and it will protect you from a misapplication of the practice. So that's the third reason, so that you can be, incentivized, I suppose, to find a guru. Otherwise, who would care for a guru? Who would care for guidance? And that's why I think driving is such a great metaphor, because very few people actually get into the car and try to learn how to drive by themselves, right? How many amongst you just got into a car and you're like, you know what? I am my own guru. Krishnamurti said so I'm just going to learn how to drive. Very rarely will somebody think that, because they know that the car is heavy machinery, and that if they mishandle it, they could get hurt and other people could get hurt. So do you think it's any different for the machinery of the body and mind, which is infinitely more complex? If you want to drive a car, you go to a driving school. At the very least, You go to the driving school so you can learn like what the signs mean on the street, right? So like yeah, but like somebody had to teach us how to drive it. So even if we steal the car, like it's unlikely that I don't know, Jess, did you like just figure it out? You just like okay, nice. Okay, there goes my example. But Miles Grace was there. It does work sometimes. That's true. There are many people who've never had a guru who just figured it out on their own, but maybe they could have done so with much less pain had they just had some instruction, you know? But that being said, it's totally possible. It's totally possible to do this, but it's inadvisable. Do you see? Just because it's possible in some cases doesn't mean that it's prescribed for all. Like it's better that you go to a driving school, you find someone who actually knows how to drive a car, who can sit with you while you practice driving, and also who also can give you the theoretical knowledge to understand the signs on the street. Now, if you don't have any of this and you just jump into a car, you might get in trouble, other people might get in trouble, but even if you knew how to drive, you might not even know the signs. So even if you're skillfully navigating the body and mind or skillfully navigating your vehicle through intuition alone, some people are just endowed with that kind of intuition. Even then, there's a sign in front of you, there's something telling you to go this way, but you don't understand that. So you go this way and then you get into some accident because of a misunderstanding with someone else on the street, some astral being or something, you know. So that being said, we need a guru, but we won't go for a guru if Tantra is just offered out there in the public. So I think this kind of practical wisdom that most people have about most issues in their life should be brought to spirituality also. I need a teacher for most anything in this world. How much more true must that be for the very complex endeavor of managing my mind and body in spiritual life? So the fourth reason, so the first reason is people might misunderstand the philosophy. The second reason is they might get into trouble because these are radical sadhanas that might cause a reaction, which they might be ill-equipped to handle. Thirdly, this incentivizes secrecy, incentivizes people to seek out a guru, which will protect them from number one and number two. But fourthly, the secrecy allows the guru to filter her spiritual community. So she could say, oh, these people are insincere, or these people have malicious intent. They want to learn these sadhanas because they want to like kill their enemies or something. So secrecy is a way that a guru can keep some people out and invite some people in. And that sounds like it's exclusivist, and it is, but it's not based on caste or ethnicity or anything like that. It's based on sincerity. And that's up to the teacher. Like based on what kind of community the teacher is trying to create, the secrecy of Tantra gives the teacher the ability to pick and choose, as it were. And that might sound problematic, except in most cases, this is used to just create a genuine spiritual community, to make sure that the people who are in that community are all in that community for the same reason. I'm not going to say the right reason, because like we were saying last time, I defend mothers' rights and I also defend mothers' wrongs. So it might be a community where it is all about black magic. Well, in that case, it's the guru's prerogative to make sure that only the people who care about that get admitted to the community. What if someone who wants to realize God ends up in this black magic community? They're going to be disappointed and they're going to be a buzzkill for everyone else. Like imagine the Sangha goes out to the smashan, to the cremation ground, right? And they're sitting there, it's a new moon night, tomorrow's Dhumavati Jayanti, maybe it's like eighth day of the waxing moon, they go out, they sit, and then the guru says, now tie the blue string around the black crow, and here at this crossroads, at this smashan, into this funeral pyre, offer this crow into the fire, and then smite the enemy. And then suddenly the guy, you know, the one who isn't really interested in this might be like, but Gurudeva, isn't the world impermanent? What will we gain by destroying our enemies? Won't a new enemy appear sooner or later? Will we have to do this again when a new enemy comes? And plus, why are we doing that ritual next week for the attainment of wealth? What can wealth really buy anyway? Aren't those things impermanent? Oh my God, what a wet blanket. Here we are in the cremation ground trying to hex our ex, and you're telling me about impermanence? You're mansplaining moksha to me? Who wants that? So I think it's good for a guru to be able to say, look, that's not the kind of energy that we want here. Like, we want to kill people and we want money. And so you're maybe not suited for this community. That's fine, right? And the reverse is also true. There might be some communities where the goal, like ours, is to attain realization of God, to attain atyantika dukkha nivritti, or paramananda prapti, the categorical end of all suffering, the attainment of the highest bliss. So we're not interested in a slew of practices that some of you might be interested in. So this is not the community for that kind of thing. Here, we're interested in what Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda taught. We're interested in moksha. We don't demonize bhoga, but we don't focus on it either, and we don't like teach pujas to make money, for instance, or we don't teach pujas to like heal the sick. That's not what we're into. But that doesn't mean you can't be into those things. Maybe you do want to be a healer. You want to like heal the sick. That's wonderful. It's just you should know that you're not really going to get that here. That's not our focus. So then a spiritual community needs to have some kind of system to invite into the community those that would resonate with the ideals of the community and keep out those who might not. And that's why the Diksha system and the secrecy of Tantra is very important. Okay, so we have four reasons now. The fifth reason could be that it's really sacred. Like I was saying earlier, when it came to Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna, even if you do want to tell everyone about it, you couldn't. Because what could you make them understand of this which goes beyond the body and the mind? The experiences of Tantra are so defined, so refined, so refined that they cannot be defined, if you will. Like they cannot be offered in mundane thoughts and mundane speech. So often when a teacher wanted to express some idea on this level, they would use some kind of parable. And then they're very likely to be misunderstood anyway. So to avoid the risk of misunderstanding, and because we don't really have the words for it anyway, we just stay silent. So one reason to keep quiet is because you can't express it, and maybe because you won't. It's just too sacred, it's just too intimate. Like I was saying earlier, you don't just run around and tell people what you did in the bedroom with your beloved. There's an intimacy there, a sacredness there that kind of creates some privacy, a secrecy, if you will. So that's the fifth reason. A sixth reason is because a lot of this stuff is rather transgressive, especially within a Brahmanical context. So offering meat and fish and wine and offering drugs and offering sexual union, offering sexual fluids, offering menses, all of these things would be despicable for an Orthodox Brahmin in the classical Tantric period. Arguably, even now, these things would be quite challenging for an Orthodox Brahmin. Arguably, this would be challenging for any society, you know. And so the Tantric rituals, especially in the Vamachara or the Kaula world, they should not be spoken about publicly because it would invite, at the very least, social censure, at the very worst, some violence maybe. The community might react against those practices. And in
Oh,
Europe and in the Middle East, we saw
mm.
that this was the Inquisition.
Doctor, doctor,
Like witches
doctor.
were being burned at the stake, you know, people were tied to a rock and thrown into the water, all because people misunderstood their intentions. Many of these people were healers, after all. And many of you carry that trauma also because in some past life, you too know what it was like to be part of that Inquisition. So now there might be a hatred for the church. Some of you have that deep desire to distance yourself from the church. Maybe that's there in your karmic predicament. This idea that at some point in the past, you might have been persecuted for your religious practices. And so that's less likely to happen in India. In India, of course, there's much more tolerance in India for spirituality. In other places, if you say something, you'll be crucified, or you'll be stoned, or you'll be killed. In India, you could get away with a lot. But still, this Tantra stuff is pushing it. So even though you're not likely to get killed, you might be outcast, literally. So you as a Brahmana might not be like allowed back into the town or something like that. And good riddance, a lot of these practitioners went into the cremation ground and removed themselves. You know, like I'll be excusing myself now, many of them said. But not all of them. Some of them were still interested in being parts of society, like Abhinavagupta and like his disciple Kshema Raja. These were all Rajanakas, meaning they were court philosophers. They were still part of the day-to-day affairs of the state. So they weren't interested in going to the cremation ground and sitting around a fire all day smoking hemp. They were interested in leading lives within society in order to be able to teach and be able to make art and attend theater productions and whatnot. So for that, secrecy was very important. So these are maybe five or six reasons why Tantra has been kept secret. But like I've been saying, that's also a problem. Because where there is secrecy, there is room for mystery mongering and superstition. So because people haven't been open and direct and clear about Tantra, it's created a kind of vacuum of information which is filled with all sorts of hobgoblins, all sorts of magical, mysterious ideas. And a lot of these, I think, percolated during the dark ages of India. We had a dark ages too, you know. We can call this the post-classical tantric period or the medieval age. During the 700 years of Muslim rule, obviously there were beautiful things that happened, like King Akbar's rule. That was a wonderful moment in Indian history. But there were also some dark times, and a lot of this stuff had to go underground. And as a result of like even more secrecy in the post-classical tantric period than we saw in the classical tantric period, naturally all sorts of superstitions started to percolate. And people had all sorts of phantasmagorical ideas about tantra, and everything became kind of magical because it was saturated with a kind of magical thinking, which is debilitating to the rational, healthy mind, which is disempowering for the genuine soul wending its way out of darkness. It only piles more gloom on gloom, if you will, this kind of misunderstanding, you see. So, no understanding is safer than misunderstanding. Isn't it Mark Twain who said, it's not the things that we don't know that hurt us. It's the things that we know for sure that just ain't so, or something along those lines. So Mark Twain pointed out that it's like half knowledge that's really the problem. If you're ignorant, you're safe, thankfully. But in the tantric medieval age, if you will, because there was a lot of ignorance, a lot of secrecy, it created kind of half-baked knowledge. And a lot of mysticism and superstition was spread to the debilitating effect of the Indian mind. So Swami Vivekananda, in that essay, in the poem essay, in the speech, his speeches are so poetic, they might as well be called poems. But in that speech I read to you some time ago, he said, this knowledge fell into the hands of the chosen few who destroyed 90% of it. And what was left, they made it into a secret. You see, and they did this because they wanted to have all the knowledge and they wanted to have all the power. And he said, at least the people in the East knew something. But now the people in the West, they don't know anything, but they act as if they know something and they teach all sorts of nonsense in the name of Tantra. So Tantra can be very easily be misrepresented, or the secrecy around these traditions can be used in a very manipulative way. So we presented seven, in that lecture, I think seven, or recently just 5 or 6 reasons that I think good reasons for keeping Tantra secret. But there's also a bad reason. And this might be more prevalent than you might expect. Like maybe one reason people keep this stuff secret is because in order to create in order to create a demand, maybe they have to give you a sense of scarcity or exclusivity. So often it's a bid to get money. It's like, okay, if you want this knowledge, you pay this amount of money, and then you get into this like understanding. And if you want even more knowledge, you pay even more money. So you find people are very like withholding when it comes to knowledge because they don't have very much. If somebody has a lot, they tend to be very generous with what they have. But if they don't have very much, then they become very stingy. And to justify the lack of content, they have to create a lot of fluff and a lot of these structures that are superstitious in nature. So be very careful, my friends. In the world of Tantra, especially given the internet and its ability to make more rampant and more prevalent these superstitions, we're likely to get into trouble because we just hear so many different things from so many different people and it debilitates the mind. So that's why I wanted to read to you from Swami Vivekananda Raja Yoga, that very first chapter, all those weeks ago. It was called Introductory. And there he says, we must bring the broad daylight of reason into it. Where there is mystery mongering, it weakens the mind. And it leads us into, oh, hey, Natalie, good to see you, Ma, into problematic assumptions. And so Natalie's asking really good questions like, give me an example. Like, what's an example of a superstition? I don't know, maybe like if I chant this mantra without Diksha, Mother Kali will smite me. Or the only way I can chant to Mother Kali is if I get Diksha, and my guru has asked me for this amount of money, and if I don't pay it, he will curse me. And to avoid that curse, I better pay him the money. And I've seen all sorts of things. Let me just pause the recording now and share some anecdotes of some people who've got into trouble because of this sort of thing. I might as well just say this on the record, but my friend was recently had by somebody, by a tantric, so she went to him and she was struggling with something in life, and then she presented her case to him. This is in response to Natalie Ma's question about like examples. Like, give me an example of superstitions leading us into compromising situations. Here's one. So she went to this person full of sincerity, out of a deep conviction and faith in the tradition, in this person who is a representative of the tradition. So she went to that person, and that person read her chart. Be careful. These people make up all sorts of things sometimes, they look at your chart and you don't know what's going on because they use all this like technical language and they'll be like, oh, because of this nakshatra or because of this conjunct or that conjunct or this line over here means this thing, and like if I do this, then that's why it means this. Like, who knows? They could just say a bunch of jargon and wave their hands at you, and if you don't know anything about what's going on, you might just have to take their word for it. So this person, a dear friend of mine, she goes, and she comes here sometimes. So she goes, and this is where she relayed the story. So she goes and she presents her problem to him, and this tantric says something to the effect of, oh Ma, you've been cursed. I can do some sadhanas for you to remove the curse. You pay me this amount of money and I will perform the sadhanas for you, for your benefit. Already you know you're getting into trouble there. You should do your own sadhana. Why do you have other people do your sadhana for you? And who knows, you might pay that person thousands of dollars and they just like watch TV or something and then call you in a month and say, yeah, I performed the 100,000 rounds of this mantra or something. How do you know? But in any case, so she goes to this person She pays allegedly thousands and thousands of dollars for this person to do sadhana, and then she gets convinced by this person that they now have to do some kind of special Bhairavi sadhana. And to complete that sadhana, she would then need to like sleep with him for a number of days or something like that. And she was so innocent and so sweet, and she was like, okay, if it's the sadhana, because this person was representing a lineage that he knew nothing about. And he was using his costume and he was using his position as a teacher to just, manipulate people. And like I just said, it's one thing to take a person out on a date and express genuine romantic interest. It's one thing to do all of this consensually. That's perfectly fine. Like if you're a spiritual teacher and you want to date, obviously that's not a problem. But it can be. And in this case, it is because that person is allegedly married and this person didn't come to him for romance. This person came to him for a solution to the various problems that she was struggling with spiritually and materially. And because of that weakness, because of that superstition, he was able to manipulate her into taking things she wasn't really willing to give. And this is a common story because sincere aspirants don't think for themselves or feel as if they can't. That other people, like priests, it's priestcraft essentially in any tradition, in any part of the world, has to deal with this. Yeah, so that's the thing. It's commercial. And not only is it commercial, it can be political. And not only is it political, it can be very much seedy, perverse. It can be very manipulative and problematic on so many different levels. And all of this is perpetuated because we don't really know about this stuff. And we trust these shamans of our society to know, but we trust them to also have integrity. But sometimes they don't. And so that's why it's very dangerous when we ourselves don't know, because then we can't protect ourselves from this kind of thing. So superstitionalism, mystery mongering, secrecy, these are all things that disempower us. And when disempowered, we're more and more susceptible to this kind of thing. So therefore, I want to read to you a little bit from Swami Vivekananda's My Master, because you'll see in this exposition of the example of Sri Ramakrishna, we find the solution, the panacea. And you could say, is this a problem in the New Age? No, it's not a New Age. It's been the Kali Yuga for a while. And in a moment, I'm going to read to you from Abhinavagupta, who himself has had a problem with false gurus. He himself says that he was deluded by many false teachers. Like it happened to Abhinavagupta, for instance, because he was so curious. He wanted to learn. And because of his sincerity, he fell into the clutches of certain unscrupulous individuals with selfish motives maybe, and he joyfully confesses it. And as a warning to the rest of us, especially when it comes to Vamachara, to the Kaula traditions, especially when it comes to Tantra, because it's a very mystical tradition. There is Jyotish. There are some planetary influences. There is Ayurveda. There is the mystical use of certain herbs at the right time of the lunar cycle. There's a lot of mystery around the mantras. There's the Sanskrit language, which, like Latin, can be used to keep out the uninitiated and to befuddle their minds and to fool them to doing this or to doing that. Jai Ma Kālī. So all of that can happen when there is this air of secrecy. Anyway, give me a moment. I know I'm talking. It's like I'm telling you like ghost stories now, and the house is starting to get very dark. So I feel like I should have a flashlight under my chin or something. But let me just turn on some lights. The ghee lamps have gone off, but let me just turn this light on, that light on. There, okay. No, that's better. So, I hope that suffices, Natalie Ma. That's maybe one example of superstitions leading people astray. Or like, the tantric says, okay, pay me $1,000. I will do this. Happened to me in the Kal Bhairav temple. So I'm in the Kal Bhairav temple, right? Like sitting and seeing Kal Bhairav. And then somebody comes up behind me and smacks me with a broom. Okay, that's not problematic because that's part of the tradition. Like the broom is supposed to sweep away all curses. So he comes and smacks me on the back with a broom, and then he just starts chanting Kal Bhairav Ashtakam. He just starts chanting it. Kashika Puradinata Kala Bhairavam Bhajet. And I chant it with him. He's just standing next to me. I'm looking at Kal Bhairav in Varanasi, and I'm just like chanting it with him, having a wonderful time. And at the end of the recitation, he says to me in Hindi, give money. 2,000 rupees. Of course, he knew that I was South Indian. I was a foreigner in Varanasi. Like this was some time back. Like he knew. Obviously he knew that I was not native to those parts. So he asked for 2,000 rupees. And then I was like, no, Baba, it's okay. Something like that. And then he said, huh? And he got all angry. He's like, I'll curse you. And then now if you were superstitious, that would frighten you. You'd be like, oh my God, this guy wearing all black with this beard and this jutta with all this ash. in this temple next to a cremation ground is saying he's going to curse me? Here's $2,000. Actually, here's $4,000. And if I pay you $5,000, will you curse my cousin? You know, like if you get into this world of like curses and superstitions, which is not entirely untrue, by the way, then you can be very susceptible. I laughed in his face and I said, try. And then I walked out. But that's only because whether or not he curses me, I don't mind. Like, but you could imagine that in another setting, if I believed in those curses, and it's not that I don't, but if you're afraid of them, out of that fear, you might have to part with money or with other things that you might otherwise not want to part with. So like this mystery mongering, this superstition, this fear is created because of a lack of knowledge. So Swamiji said, if there's something ennobling, if there's something good, it should be offered to everyone in the broad daylight of reason. So let's read now from Swami Vivekananda's My Master. It appears in Volume 4 of the Complete Works of Swami Vivekananda. By the way, a lot of this is inspired by Myra's question with regards to what our ideals are as a community and what our goals are moving forward. But it's also inspired by the myriad of emails I get every week from sincere spiritual aspirants all over the world who are having run-ins with problematic characters. And some of them are really conflicted, you know. They write to me and they say, oh, but I recognize that this person is so brilliant. They're so full of knowledge. They're so charismatic. They're so inspired. Like, I know that they are a good teacher, and yet, and then they bring up a bunch of these red flags and they're like, what should I do? And I'm like, run the other way, girl, you know. But often they're feeling like, but this person is also kind of good, and I know they're also problematic in these ways. And a lot of the questions are, is this normal? You know, like, is this what I can expect from a Kashmir Shaiva teacher? Like, this person seems to be very emotionally distant. These are words I'm quoting, but almost like directly quoting from an email that I read recently. And this person, very sincere aspirant, was saying, this person talks about very high states, claims to have had very high states of meditation, which I find very sus, by the way, a person who freely talks about their very high states of attainment. But in any case, she's saying this person has high states and claims to be enlightened. Again, a statement that I find somewhat problematic. But then on the other hand, she as a woman notices that this person has many unresolved issues and can be very condescending when threatened by a student or discourages any kind of questioning of that person's authority. And she can sense with her intuition some of these interactions in which he is not representing an integrated, wholesome being. And yet, all of these claims. And the problem is that the person has the goods in the sense of intellectual knowledge. You know, they've studied, they've read a few books. And so we want knowledge. We're interested in learning. And so we come to these people. And then we just have to put up with all of this nonsense because we feel like this is the only way to get that knowledge. And so that's part of why I felt like this discussion would be important to have, just because of the sheer volume of emails I get every week on this issue. Like just how problematic. I'm sure in the Q&A we could have a more candid discussion about these kinds of things. And I'd be happy to tell you more stories, of course, because I think they can be very educational without judging anybody after all. We are all, each and every one of us, just where we are, and everyone is fine just where they are. But we should be, I think, informed. Especially those of us who are newer to the world of Tantra, to the world of non-dual Tantra, like Kaula Yaga kind of things, like Vamachara, like especially we should be careful, you know, because this is an especially problematic realm of spirituality. And you can see its parallels in the Western New Age as well. Okay, anyway, I'm just riffing, but now let's go into something a little more structured. I want to read to you now from Volume 4 of the Complete Works of Swami Vivekananda. This is the compilation of 2 lectures called My Master. And the rest of the lecture is just going to be this. I'm just going to read to you from My Master. It's really beautiful. Of course, it brought me to tears when I first read it. And for some of you, this might be the first time that you hear it. And so be open to the emotional power of this reading, because Swamiji is really very candid. And he's obviously speaking about things that are really, really, really important to him. Now, it's rather long, in that it could be a book unto itself, and it is actually published as a short little manual. So I don't think I'll be able to get through the whole of it, but it would, I think, be immensely practical and beneficial to do so, to at least read much of it, if not all of it. But even if I read just a few pages from the beginning, we'll have enough to work with, I think, in explaining the ideals and the values of our community in reference to some of the more problematic elements that we find in the New Age and in spiritual communities and in spiritual teachers and in Tantra. So that being said, here's My Master by Swami Vivekananda, Volume 4 of the Complete Works. It's 2 lectures delivered in New York and in England in 1896, and they were combined under the present heading. So here we go. Swamiji. Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Jai Swamiji. By the way, I'll read a few passages. I'll make a few comments here and there. It's now about 8:25, so I think we've been speaking for about an hour. I might get absorbed and just like end up finishing the whole thing. I do mean to have a Q&A at the end of all of this, and maybe we can swap horror stories if you want. It could probably be educational for some of us. But if I do get carried away, I just want you to know, don't just, you can leave anytime, okay? And I'll have this whole thing recorded and uploaded for you by tomorrow, maybe, if not. Actually, maybe not by tomorrow, but as soon as I can. So don't feel any pressure to stick around. But I think this reading and just the ideas that are here in this reading will be not only of interest to most of you, but I think it will be in many ways a saving grace for some of us. Because especially if we're new, just understanding this stuff can be so grounding, can be so helpful, can be so clarifying and orienting that it's like a breath of fresh air in this world of commerce, in this world of sense pleasure and power and politics. Like this can just, it's like a breath of fresh air. So here we go. My master. Whenever virtue subsides and vice prevails, I come down to help mankind, declares Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Yada yada hi dharmasya. Verse 7, chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita, the theory of the avatara. So we say Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Shankara, Chaitanya, and of course, Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swami Vivekananda. These are avatars. And from time to time, they come in order to bring balance to the force, if you will. Whenever this world of ours, on account of growth, on account of added circumstances, requires a new adjustment, a wave of power comes. And as man is acting on 2 planes, the spiritual and the material, waves of adjustment come on both planes. And you know, this is actually a unique idea in Swamiji, I think, because many of the great avatars who have come before, yes, they've been very political figures, and their influence has affected every domain of life, economical, sociological, political, but their message mainly was spiritual. In fact, many people were disappointed with the Christ because he wasn't as political as they wanted. He was talking about a change of government, but perhaps he meant it metaphorically. People maybe wanted him to take an even harsher stance against Roman tyranny, but instead he felt like the only kind of tyranny that we need to stand up against is the tyranny of one's own mind, the tyranny of one's own materialism. So Christ's message was wholly internal, although it was articulated in a very politically tumultuous time. So too with the Buddha. His interest was almost entirely spiritual. He wasn't that given to material concerns. After all, he preached monasticism to everyone that he met. He encouraged leaving the world behind. But Swamiji uniquely, and Sri Ramakrishna, of course, channeled through Swamiji, they had a special interest in secular life. So on one level, the power comes on the spiritual plane, but on the other level, it comes on the material plane. So you can see the Swami Vivekananda, the heritage and legacy is like the establishment of schools and hospitals, Bhai Larissa, and training centers and vocational institutes and bringing relief to floods and famine-stricken areas and bringing medicine to the sick. Like there's clearly a material, immanent aspect to the revelation of Sri Ramakrishna as articulated by Swami Vivekananda. So this, I think, is a unique idea. The idea that when the avatara comes, whatever the avatara is, a huge wave of power comes, not only on the spiritual plane, but also on the material plane, because we tend to function on both these planes at the same time. So here I could give a whole lecture for 1 hour on the absolute and on the relative. A lot of times we use absolute language incorrectly because we expect it to apply to our relative lives. And that leads to a lot of spiritual bypassing, a lot of repression, a lot of dissociation. So the Tibetan Buddhists have a beautiful phrase. They say, although you and your guru are the same reality, always revere your guru. Although you are that, whether or not you meditate, never miss an opportunity for a meditation retreat. Although this reality is beyond good and bad, always stick to the good and discard the bad, or something like that. So they're making 2 claims, one on the absolute level and one on the relative level. And so understanding which level we're currently speaking on is very important for clarity, because if you make absolute statements on the level of the relative body-mind world, you'll get into trouble. And similarly, if you make relative statements and expect them to be absolute, you'll miss the truth. So that being said, we are all of us operating on these two levels, spiritual and material. And when the avatara comes, a wave of clarity, a wave of power comes to purify both these planes of life. So continuing, on one side of the adjustment on the material plane, Europe has mainly been the basis during modern times. And of the adjustment on the other, the spiritual plane, Asia has been the basis through the history of the world. Oh my God, you guys, I don't think I'm ever going to get through this because these are profound ideas. The idea that even material development has something to do with the avatara. Like, it's not just a spiritual thing, but that Europe might have been the special stronghold for the development of the material plane, and India, or Asia rather, Swamiji is much broader here, is the special stronghold for spirituality. India has been its special stronghold, Swamiji said in that introductory lecture. Here he's saying Asia has been the basis throughout the history of the world. Today, man requires one more adjustment on the spiritual plane. Today, when material ideas are at the height of their glory and power, today, when man is likely to forget his divine nature through his growing dependence on matter and is likely to be reduced to a mere money-making machine, an adjustment is necessary. The voice has spoken, and the power is coming to drive away the clouds of gathering materialism. It's so interesting. Almost all the problems in life, and particularly in spiritual life, come from this, a dependence on matter. The idea that matter will somehow make me happy. Materialism. The idea that somehow it's sex and money that are the prime motives of my life. And at any means necessary, I must acquire as much of this as possible. Whether it's through business, or whether it's through war, or whether it's through the psychological warfare that we inflict upon one another in the name of spirituality. But ultimately, it all comes down to this: sex and money. Kamani Kanchan, which in one word can be called materialism. So continuing, the power has been set in motion which at no distant date will bring unto mankind once more the memory of their real nature. And again, the place from which this power will start will be Asia. This world of ours is on the plan of the division of labor. It is vain to say that one man shall possess everything. Yet how childish we are. The baby, in its ignorance, thinks that its doll is the only possession that is to be coveted in this whole universe. This is important. We shouldn't judge anybody either. Let's say we see a spiritual teacher who is using his power and authority in order to take people's money and sleep with all of his students, and he gets involved in politics and whatnot. We shouldn't judge them, because they're doing what any one of us would do if put in a similar situation. This just reflects the state of a soul in its process of development, in its process of evolution. They're on their journey, as you might say. Now, do you blame a baby for thinking that the doll is the only thing worth coveting in life? Absolutely not. It's natural for the baby to do so. That's where it is in its state of evolution. You can't say, like, being a 4-year-old is better than being a 3-month-year-old baby. Right? Not 3-month-year-old, 3-month-old baby. Like, obviously, they're both equally good because they're both equally important stages of development. They're just different, you see. So you can't blame a fallen guru or a fallen yogi or something for being that way. After all, they're just susceptible to the human frailty that is inherent to us all. So why judge? We shouldn't say an ill word about anybody. And should we see somebody in this position who has fallen, our reaction, I don't think, should be anger, although that's very natural when we are the victims of that outcome. But I think it should just be to recognize that we're all on different stages of the soul's journey, on the stages of evolution. And for some of us, it's the doll that alone matters, the doll of materialism. So we can't blame the baby. So a nation which is great in the possession of material power thinks that this is all there is to be coveted, that that is all that is meant by progress, and that that is all that is meant by civilization. And if there are other nations which do not care for possession and do not possess that power, they are not fit to live. Their whole existence is useless. On the other hand, another nation may think that mere material civilization is utterly useless. From the Orient came the voice which once told the world that if a man possesses everything that is under the sun and does not possess spirituality, what avails it? This is the Oriental type. The other is the Occidental type. And they're both fine, by the way. Each of these types has its grandeur. Each has its glory. The present adjustment will be the harmonizing, the mingling of these two ideals. To the Oriental, the world of spirit is as real to the Occidental as real to to the Oriental, the world of spirit is as real as to the Occidental is the world of the senses. In the spiritual, the Oriental finds everything he wants or hopes for. In it, he finds all that makes life real to him. Isn't that beautiful? In it, he finds all that makes life real to him. To the Occidental, he is a dreamer. To the Oriental, the Occidental is a dreamer, playing with ephemeral toys, and he laughs to think that grown-up men and women should make so much of a handful of matter, which they will have to leave sooner or later. Each calls the other a dreamer. But the Oriental ideal is as necessary for the progress of the human race as is the Occidental, and I think it is more necessary. Machines never made mankind happy, and never will make. He who is trying to make us believe this will claim that happiness is in the machine, but it is always in the mind. That man alone who is the lord of his mind can become happy, and none else. And what, after all, is this power of machinery? Why should a man who can send a current of electricity through a wire be called a very great man and a very intelligent man? Does not nature do a million times more than that every moment? Why not then fall down and worship nature? What avails it if you have power over the whole world, if you have mastered every atom in the universe? That will not make you happy unless you have the power of happiness in yourself, until you have conquered yourself. If you want the proof, the evidence for this statement, come visit me in Los Angeles and I'll take you to Brentwood. I work in some schools in that area, and never have I seen so much misery as in these halls of wealth and power here in this country of materialism. The hearts are broken. The lights are working, no problem, but the hearts are not. So the argument here is that happiness is not in the machine, it's not in the money. You could control every atom in the universe, but that would not make us happy until we've controlled our own mind. So here, you might have gained control over the external world. But you might have no control over the internal world. And as long as that control is not established, there will be no joy for us. It's like being in Disneyland, but we're like deathly ill. We can't really enjoy the rides, you know? But it's not to say Disneyland sucks. You see? There's not an argument against Disneyland. It's just an argument against trying to enjoy Disneyland when you're deathly ill. Anyway, continuing. Man is born to conquer nature, it is true, but the Occidental means by nature only physical or external nature. It is true that external nature is majestic, with its mountains and oceans and rivers and with its infinite powers and varieties. Yet, there is a more majestic internal nature of man, higher than the sun, moon, and stars, higher than this earth of ours, higher than the physical universe, transcending these little lives of ours, and it affords another field of study. There, the Orientals excel, just as the Occidentals excel in the other. Therefore, it is fitting that whenever there is spiritual adjustment, it should come from the Orient. It is also fitting that when the Oriental wants to learn about machine making, he should sit at the feet of the Occidental and learn from him. And this is just what Swami Vivekananda did. He looked around and he was inspired by all the ideas that he came into contact with here in the West, and he tried his best to import some of them back into India when he returned. So people were very upset about this. He felt like, they felt like he was too westernized because he insisted on like chairs and tables in the Belur Math ashram. He insisted on things like organization and developing schools and research facilities and vocational training along Western lines, because these are the things that the Occident has mastered, the West has mastered. And Swamiji was sitting at the feet of the Occidental, to use his phrase, in order to learn these things. That kind of humility is necessary. So if you want to learn how to make an electrical grid work, go to Germany or something. But, and this next statement is interesting, it is when the Occident wants to learn about the spirit, about God, about the soul, about the meaning and mystery of this universe, he must sit at the feet of the Oriental to learn. I am going to present to you the life of one man who has put in motion such a wave in India. But before going into the life of this man, I will try to present before you the secret of India, what India means. Do you see what happens? Swamiji is about to talk about Sri Ramakrishna, and then he decides, okay, maybe not. Either, okay, I'm not worthy, or this is too intimate, this is too sacred, or this is not really going to help you. This kind of personality, this idea of sect and of religion. No, let me just start with the principle. So see, the moment he starts talking about Sri Ramakrishna, immediately he zooms out. His mind broadens and expands and takes on a universal proportion. And now look what he's about to say. He's going to talk about Sri Ramakrishna, but before he can talk about Sri Ramakrishna, he has to first talk about India. Because as many Western scholars like Mueller and Roland pointed out, that Sri Ramakrishna is really just the manifestation of the voice of all India, of all the world, if you will. By the way, you guys, if you've heard anything that I've ever said that has resonated with you, it's because they were your own thoughts, they were your own ideas. It's just that Ramakrishna and Vivekananda articulated them. I've never said to you anything that I didn't hear from Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, at least I hope. And if I have said to you anything that wasn't there in Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, reject it at once. because I've only come to present Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. Nothing of my own idea. Any mistakes are purely mine, and anything that has resonated with you has come from the Guru. But who is the Guru? The Guru is the Avatara. And that means the ideas of the Avatara should resonate with the mind of the age. You should feel as if they are your own ideas. And your very blood tingles with the notion of the oneness of all existence, the harmony of all religions, with the innate divinity of the soul, with the motherhood of God, etc. So in any case, you have to talk about India first. Before you can talk about Sri Ramakrishna, you have to talk about the spiritual aspirations of millions, now billions of Indians before you can even start to understand Sri Ramakrishna. So let's do that. Before going into the life of this man, I will try to present before you the secret of India, what India means. If those whose eyes have been blinded by the glamour of material things, whose whole dedication of life is to eating and drinking and enjoying, whose ideal of possession is lands and gold, whose ideal of pleasure is that of the senses, whose God is money, and whose goal is a life of ease and comfort in this world and death after that, whose minds never look forward, and who rarely think of anything higher than the sense objects in the midst of which they live, if such as these go to India, what do they see? Poverty, squalor, superstition, darkness, hideousness everywhere. By the way, isn't there a Family Guy bit where like the guy goes with his friends to India and they get off the plane and they're like, this is the most spiritual place in the world. And they step off the plane and they look around, there's like a funeral pyre and an Aziz Ansari show that people are lining up for. Do you know what I'm talking about? You can like Google it. Family Guy going to India, disenchantment, I don't know. And then he gets off the plane, he looks around, he's like, this is the most spiritual place. And he looks around and sees the funeral pyre, the dogs, the trash, the poverty, the squalor, the darkness, the hideousness. And he looks around and says, oh, God is not here. And they all get back on the plane and fly away. So this is exactly that. If you go to India and you are this kind of person, a person whose eyes have been blinded by the glamour of material things, whose dedication to life is to eating and drinking and enjoying, whose ideal of possession is lands and goals, whose ideal of pleasure is that of the senses, whose God is money, and whose goal is a life of ease and comfort in this world, whose minds never look forward and who rarely thinks of anything higher than the sense objects in the midst of which they live. If these kinds of people go to India, then they will see poverty, squalor, superstition, darkness, hideousness everywhere. And by the way, a note on cultural appropriation. How many people are presenting Indian ideas, but they've never been to India? And you know what? If they go to India, they'll hate it. Honestly, I've seen people like this. I've seen people, and I'm not knocking it. Again, everyone is great, each in their own place. We're all on our journey. But I've seen people who charge thousands of dollars for workshops in which they offer nothing but fluff on misunderstood concepts of Ayurveda and chakras and all these tantric things that are so fashionable in the new age these days. And you go to their workshop and you pay thousands of dollars and you're in a very comfortable environment and they tell you all of this fluffy stuff. And then this very same person goes to India and they're horrified by the reality of the traditions that they're trying to represent abroad. You know, and I've seen this with my very own eyes. With such people, I've gone to India and I've seen their discomfort, their condescension, their fear and hatred of the very people whose ideas they use to enrich themselves without ever once thinking of India. And then they go on social media and they preach how uh, conscious they are of the plights of people in third world nations, developing nations, you know, and they appear to be so interested in culture because that's fashionable. It's fashionable to be a person who is interested in culture, especially in indigenous cultures. But if such a person were to come with me to that indigenous culture and live with people in that setting where there is no running water and you have to squat to poop outside, where, there's no light at night and there are all these bugs and you don't speak the language and the food is too spicy for you. If you were to actually go into the very culture that you want everyone on the internet to think that you love, you would hate it. You would absolutely despise that culture. And all you would be doing all day long is taking pictures of everybody so you can show to your friends on Instagram how cultured you are. Look, I'm with this person. He has jata. Look, I'm at this place. Look, everyone's brown. Look at that. Isn't that cool? But actually, I've seen in that setting, once the phone goes down, it's just clenching of the teeth. It's just discomfort. You see, so that's the thing. It's like if such a person whose interest in this world, and this is not a judgment, everyone is where they are and they're all great. But if such a person were to go to India, to the place, the land, the birth of all these chakras and kundalini. By the way, can I just rant a little bit? Yesterday, I had gone to see the new Wes Anderson film, which was awesome. Loved it, as I tend to with this director. But I went to see the new Wes Anderson film with a friend of mine, and we were stepping out of the theater, and she had said to me, So yesterday, I was in a business meeting. She works in tech. And so you know how tech companies, a lot of them are in San Francisco, they're often named after Sanskrit words. Haven't you noticed? It's kind of cute. So anyway, there's a tech company named Asana. Okay. So my friend, she's a very close friend of mine who I've known for many, many years, who has come to many of my Hatha yoga classes. She obviously knows that it's asana, like Adho Mukha Shvanasana. So she brings this up in the Zoom meeting. She's like, "Oh, I'm having trouble accessing my account on Asana." And the boss of that company is there in the Zoom meeting and she pipes up and says, it's pronounced Asana. And at that point, what can Grace, my friend, really say or do? Because if she were to correct the boss, that would be problematic. In fact, the reason why the boss named it Asana is because she loves yoga and she goes to yoga studios and practices yoga avidly. And so, to represent her love for this tradition, she decided to name her company after it, but belligerently insists that it's pronounced Asana. And these kinds of people, many of them might actually even be of Indian descent, you know? And now, the problem with all of this is not that they don't know how to pronounce the word asana. What? I'm confused now. It's not that they don't know how to, that's not the problem here. That's not what we're finding fault with. The problem is not that they don't know. Who can be faulted for not knowing? None of us know anything. The fault here, if there is any at all, is that they don't care, right? That's it. It's not that they don't know, it's that they don't want to know. But if they actually take steps to come to know, they might find that they are repulsed by what they encounter. So that's the claim that's being made here is that if these people would actually go to India, they would find it a place of poverty, squalor, superstition, darkness, hideousness. Why? And now Swamiji gives the reason. Because in their minds, enlightenment means dress, education, social politeness. Because spirituality means the outfit, right? It means the look. Whereas Occidental nations have used every effort to improve their material position, India has done differently. There in India live the only men in the world who in the whole history of humanity never went beyond their frontiers to conquer anyone, who never coveted that which belonged to anyone else, whose only fault was that their lands were so fertile and they accumulated wealth by the hard labor of their hands and so tempted other nations to come and despoil them. They are contented to be despoiled and to be called barbarians, and in return they only want to send to this world visions of the supreme, to lay bare for the world the secrets of human nature, to rend the veil that conceals the real man, because they know the dream, because they know that behind this materialism lives the real divine nature of man, which no sin can tarnish, no crime can spoil, no lust can taint, which fire cannot burn nor water wet, which heat cannot dry nor death kill. And to them this true nature of man is as real as is any material object to the senses of an Occidental. This was the teaching that stopped Alexander the Great in his tracks, this great Western emperor from Macedonia. He was not able to enter into India because he was stopped at its border by a naked yogi who quoted this very passage from the Bhagavad Gita. And that so impressed Alexander that he had to walk away from this great nation whose sole treasure lies in the world of spirit. So Alexander the Great, the height of Western pomp and power, was humbled by a naked Indian man, scrawny, sitting on a rock, whose eyes were full of wisdom, whose only possession was this knowledge. Just as you are brave to jump at the mouth of a cannon with a hurrah, just as you are brave in the name of patriotism to stand up and give up your lives for your country, so are they brave in the name of God. There it is that when a man declares that this world of ideas there it is that when a man declares that this is a world of ideas, that it is all a dream, he casts off clothes and property to demonstrate that what he believes and thinks is true. There it is that a man sits on the banks of a river when he has known that life is eternal and wants to give up his body just as nothing, just as you can give up a bit of straw. Therein lies their heroism, that they are ready to face death as a brother because they are convinced that there is no death for them. Therein lies the strength that has made them invincible through hundreds of years of oppression and foreign invasion and tyranny. This is why sometimes my heart bleeds for India, because it's forgetting what its strength is in, not in military arms. Its strength is in the spirit. Its strength is in jnana, in this knowledge that does not need to be defended because it defends itself. You think this naked man on a rock needed a retinue of soldiers to protect him from Alexander the Great? Ha! Alexander pulled out his sword on this man, and this man merely smiled. That's what defeated Alexander. Do you understand? It's not a show of force. What defeated Alexander the Great at the border of India before this invasion was the twinkle in this man's eyes, the mad gleam of the sadhu who knows that he cannot die. Right? So this Bhagavad Gita verse is very important. This Bhagavad Gita verse defends India. Not its wealth, not its military. Nothing can defend India but knowledge. And this is what Swamiji is saying. The strength of India is in its spirituality. And by the way, as my very wise friend once said, do you protect Dharma or does Dharma protect you? And this is the Dharma, this verse from the Bhagavad Gita, that you are that which fire cannot burn, which water cannot wet, which heat cannot dry, nor death kill. This was the Sanskrit verse on the lips of that sadhu, and this was what silenced an empire. Alexander had to go home, he contracted a fever, and died shortly after. Anyway, therein lies the strength that has made them invincible throughout hundreds of years of oppression and foreign invasion and tyranny. The nation lives today, and in that nation, even the days of the direst disaster, spiritual giants have never failed to rise. Asia produces giants in spirituality, just as the Occident produces giants in politics, giants in science. In the beginning of the present century, when Western influence began to pour into, when Western conquerors, sword in hand, came to demonstrate to the children of the sages that they were mere barbarians, a race of dreamers, that their religion was but mythology, and God and soul and everything they had been struggling for were mere words without meaning, that the thousands of years of struggle, the thousands of years of endless renunciation had all been in vain, the question began to be agitated among young men at the universities whether the whole national existence up to then had been a failure, whether they must begin anew on the Occidental plan, tear up their old books, burn their philosophies, drive away their preachers, and break down their temples. Did not the Occidental conqueror, the man who demonstrated his religion with sword and gun, say that all the old ways were mere superstitions and idolatry? Children brought up and educated in the new schools, started on the Occidental plan, drank in these ideas from their childhood. And it is not to be wondered at that doubts arose. But instead of throwing away superstition and making a real search after truth, the test of truth became, what does the West say? The priest must go, the Vedas must be burnt, because the West has said it so. Out of the feeling of unrest thus produced, there arose a wave of so-called reform in India. Now, many of you in this country know what is being spoken of here if you are Native American. If you're Hawaiian, right? You know what it is to have your children ripped from your homes and taken to some school in which they are forced to imbibe ideas that are foreign to them. You know what it means for someone to come sword in hand or gun in hand and tell you that everything that you've been working up to for these past thousands of years have all been vain mythology, and to give up all of these things for our God. Why? Because our God has given us this power, this money, and therefore he must be true. But a God whose authority rests in stepping on the necks of many civilizations, a God whose power rests in the sword, is a God with no power. For true power does not assert itself with violence. And we know this. We know this. So why do we respect power? Why do we respect swords and guns? Better to die, I think, in the face of a man wielding a sword than to imbibe his debilitating ideas that have led him to that barbarous position. In any case, now in India, this is very interesting. It's to the credit of the Indian people that they're willing to take up any idea that they hear. So the Mongols come, okay, let's try that. The British Raj comes, okay, let's try that. So the Brahmo Samaj movement was very commendable because they tried to take the best of what was being offered to them by the colonial project, but they were also trying to articulate it along the lines of their own tradition. So they wanted to offer a Hinduism that was stripped of its quote-unquote superstitious, mythological, idolatrous elements. And they wanted to present instead a Christianized version of the Upanishadic teachings, which can be understood to be a rather noble attempt at integrating these new Western ideas in the context of their home tradition. So you have to recall that Swami Vivekananda was very taken up with Brahmo ideals, and he himself was a member of the Brahmo Samaj. He himself signed a pledge never to worship deities in stone or in brass or in wood, which he, of course, later transgressed under the influence of the idolater Sri Ramakrishna. In one place, Swami Vivekananda said, if idol worship can produce a Sri Ramakrishna, then I say take 1,000 idols. But in any case, this is not the time to defend Hinduism. It's a time to look at reform. And it's a time to question on what basis we are attempting to reform. So check this out. If you wish to be a true reformer, now he's speaking not only to the Brahmo Samaj, obviously he has the Brahmo Samaj in mind, but he's speaking to any would-be reformer in the world within any religious context, within any culture, whether it's a sociological, economical, political, or religious revolution, whatever your reform is, pay attention to the following, because this is about reforming with integrity. So Swamiji says, if you wish to be a true reformer, three things are necessary. This isn't interesting. Three things are necessary. The first is to feel. Do you really feel for your brothers? Do you really feel that there is so much misery in the world, so much ignorance and superstition? Do you really feel that men are your brothers? Does this idea come into your whole being? Does it run with your blood? Does it tingle in your veins? Does it course through every nerve and filament of your body? Are you full of that idea of sympathy? If you are, that is only the first step. Now, let me apply this to spirituality. Many people who want to be spiritual teachers, they won't qualify by virtue of this alone. Their blood doesn't tingle with it. It's not their whole life. It's at best their job or their hobby. They have other things in their life besides spirituality, but that just won't do. You have to feel to the very core of your being this desire to serve other people around you with spirituality or with any other kind of reform movement that you have in mind. But this kind of universal sympathy, this actual feeling is required. And Swami Vivekananda felt that many of these would-be reformers, they were merely like interested in intellectual concepts. They weren't actually like the Buddha interested in people. Do you know? So sometimes when you meet spiritual teachers, often one red flag, I think, if I may point out to anything, if I may point to anything, is this: the desire to preach one's position. In other words, to ignore the student and to talk at them, not to them. See, a spiritual teacher uses your language and speaks from your point of view to guide you to a deeper understanding of your position. A spiritual teacher doesn't force their position. So sometimes spiritual teachers are caught up in concepts, in intellectual ideas, and they might have a nobility to them, an egalitarian desire to present those intellectual concepts, but it's disambiguated from the person who's actually sitting in front of them. And that was the tone that was conveyed in the most recent email I read on this issue. This woman was very sincerely looking to learn. She was looking for teaching, but she felt like this teacher could not relate to her as a human being. And so she felt that she wasn't being taught, although she was being very adequately informed. Do you see the difference? There's a difference between being informed, being presented with concepts and with ideas. There's a difference between being intellectually inspired and being actually inspired. You see? So that's the first criteria, that if you want to reform, you have to be full of that idea of sympathy. But this is only the first step. You must think next if you have found any remedy. The old ideas may all be superstition, but in and around these masses of superstitions are nuggets of gold and truth. Have you discovered means by which to keep that gold alone without any of the dross? If you have done that, that is only the second step. One more thing is necessary. What is your motive? And this is where it becomes very important. So, by the way, up to this point, we know two things are necessary: a deep compassion and love for human beings, and therefore the only real motive here should be love. But secondly, you should also have something to give. And I think from a spiritual point of view, you need to do a lot of sadhana, because unless you have spiritual power, how will you give? If you yourself are thirsty, how will you fill the cups of the people who come to you for knowledge? So I think when he's saying you have to have a means, or you have to have some kind of remedy, what he's saying is that you, from a spiritual point of view, although he's speaking very much within the political domain now, he's saying, do you have the goods though? You know, like, do you actually have something to offer, or is it all just fluff? Is it all just a bunch of graphics of circles with poorly pronounced Sanskrit words on them for $500 a workshop? You know, is there actually material? Like, have you actually found it out? Have you found out the remedy, or have you found out those nuggets of truth that are embedded within the worlds of superstition? But then there's one more step. What is your motive? Are you sure that you are not actuated by greed of gold, by thirst for fame, or for power? Now, this is where most of us get caught. How do I know I'm not doing this out of a desire for name and fame? How do I really know that to the core of my being, I'm not interested in power? How do I know that I don't care for gold? These are questions that all spiritual teachers must ask. But many of them won't ask this because they do want name and fame. They do want power, and they do want money, and there's nothing wrong with that. Except when it's in the realm of spirituality, it can be a bit misleading for reasons that we'll get into shortly. So in any case, This is a question that we have to ask. What's our motive? And Swamiji is already disqualifying the would-be reformer whose motive is greed of gold, thirst for fame, or for power. Are you really sure that you can stand to your ideals and work on, even if the whole world wants to crush you down? Are you sure you know what you want and will perform your duty and that alone, even if your life is at stake? So here Swamiji is offering some kind of Kantian idea, this idea of acting from as opposed to according to duty, right? This idea of Wilka versus Willem. He's saying, would you still do it if it was inconvenient to do so? Would you still stand by your ideals, even if it were to cost you your life? Because that's the price. That's what the Christ paid. That's what the Buddha paid. That's what any spiritual teacher worth their salt would be willing to pay. Giordano Bruno, he was willing to be burnt at the stake for his ideals. These are people whose motives cannot be questioned. Maybe you can still question, and you should, but these people, they were put to the test, and you can see that they stood their ground. So Swamiji is saying, are you sure that you will persevere so long as life endures, so long as there's one pulsation left in the heart? Then you are a real reformer. You are a teacher, a master, a blessing to mankind. But which one of us has this endurance? Who can actually sustainably do this? One by one, just watch, we're dropping like fries. Like all these spiritual teachers, the book comes out, the workshop comes out, the lecture tour begins, and then they all get burnt out. What is this? Retiring? Retiring? Like, what kind of a spiritual teacher retires? Think about this. You should die in the harness, no? I mean, if you truly felt this with your whole being, if your very blood tingled with the compassion which is required to go out and do this work, if you really had something to offer, if you really found out some method, some means, some nugget of truth hidden within the superstition, then wouldn't you do it until your very final breath? Until the last beating pulsation of your heart? That alone is the test of a spiritual teacher. So one of my red flags is retirement. My guru never retired. My guru's guru never retired. My guru's guru's guru never retired. But they were all inwardly calm, complacent. They were retired within. The kind of person who externally retires, power to them, I'm glad that they're doing self-care and all. But that person is not a spiritual teacher. For a spiritual teacher gives up their life at the drop of a pin for the benefit of another individual. In fact, they give up hundreds of lives, thousands of lives. They say, may I be born in innumerable hells and suffer untold misery if only I get the chance to help one person. After all, my very blood tingles with the idea of helping them. My being is convinced that I have the way to help them. And so why then should I put all of that down, turn around and go and spend some quiet days on some island somewhere? My ass, you think that you're here for your spirituality? Then don't pretend to be a spiritual teacher. Be a sadhaka and leave everyone alone. But if you're here for your spirituality, just do that. But if you're here for spiritual teaching, give up all ideas of spirituality. In other words, give up ideas of your own salvation. Who are you to ask for salvation when your life has been committed to the well-being of others? So that's the idea, that such a person will persevere so long as life endures. So long as there's one pulsation left in the heart. How did Buddha spend his last day, by the way? Teaching. Isn't that interesting? He spent his last day on earth, racked with so much pain from food poisoning, just giving a lesson to some rando who came to hear him speak. Isn't that wonderful? His last breath was spent saying, be a teacher unto themselves. Atmo Dipo Bhavati. His last breath was spent saying, the world is impermanent, everything corrodes, therefore be a teacher unto themselves. How beautiful. The Christ, when he was crucified, he was literally teaching on the cross. Not only was he singing psalms, Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani, but he was telling his mother, oh mother, don't weep, like he's your son too. He was saying, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Like he was preaching and teaching to the very last breath. Such a person alone I call a spiritual teacher, who has that compassion and that conviction such that they're willing to stand their ground and do their duty no matter what, even if it breaks their body, even if it breaks their mind, to the very last pulsation of their heart, to the very last breath. Then you are a real reformer. You are a teacher, a master, a blessing to mankind. But man is so impatient, so short-sighted. He has not the patience to wait. He has not the power to see. He wants to rule. He wants results immediately. Why? Because he wants to reap the fruits himself and does not really care for others. Duty for duty's sake is not what he wants. To work you have the right, but not to the fruits thereof. Chapter 2, verse 47, Bhagavad Gita. Why cling to results? Ours are the duties. Let the fruits take care of themselves. But man has no patience. He takes up any scheme. The large number of would-be reformers all over the world can be classed under this heading. So here's my advice to anybody who wants to be a spiritual teacher. Stop looking at algorithms, stop looking at likes, stop looking at comments. Because a lot of times we post something on the internet and we wait to see how it does. And we decide whether or not to be spiritual teachers based on that feedback. Just recently someone sent me a reel and they were like, hey, can you give me some feedback on this? Like, what do you think? What do I need to improve? I exploded. I just got so livid. I'll read to you what I said. And I stand by this when it comes to asking for advice on how to do this, like feedback. Okay, so this person had asked, like, can I have some feedback on this particular thing? And my feeling was as follows. Of course, I also said this, but I sent it later. My honest feedback is don't think about it. Don't conceptualize it. Don't take what anyone, anywhere, however qualified has to say about your work seriously ever. Do what you want and when you want because Ma moved through you, as you, in the form of spontaneous, artless inspiration. Never try to recreate the success of a previous reel. Never game the algorithm. Simply express yourself in each moment radically for its own sake, seeking no outcome. Express, and I go on a whole bunch of things, but it's different, right? Like this person is talking about an artistic domain, but still it's the same thing, the same question. So a spiritual teacher, usually it's impatience. It's like, I need to be recognized for my work. But this kind of thing, it might take years or lifetimes, or that recognition might never come, but why would that matter? If you could but give your life for the benefit of one person, why would it matter? So this duty for duty's sake, this is not what we're interested in. We don't have patience because we want the outcome. We want the fruits for ourselves. So man has no patience. He takes up any scheme. The larger number of would-be reformers all over the world can be classed under this heading. As I have said, the idea of reform came to India when it seemed as if the wave of materialism that had invaded her shores would sweep away the teachings of the sages. But the nation had borne the shocks of 1,000 such waves of change. So now speaking to the resilience of Bharata. This is a very nice idea. This one was mild in comparison. Wave after wave has flooded the land, breaking and crushing everything for hundreds of years. The sword had flashed. The war cries had rent the skies of India, and these floods subsided, leaving the national ideals unchanged. The Indian nation cannot be killed. Deathless it stands, and it will stand so long as that spirit shall remain as the background, as long as her people do not give up their spirituality. Beggars they may remain, poor and poverty-stricken. Dirt and squalor may surround them, perhaps throughout all time, but let them not give up their God. Let them not forget that they are the children of the sages. Just as in the West, even the man in the streets wants to trace his descent from some robber baron of the Middle Ages, so in India, even an emperor on the throne wants to trace his descent from some beggar sage in the forest. From a man who wore a bark of a tree, lived upon fruits of the forest, and communed with God. That is the type of descent we want. And so long as holiness is thus supremely venerated, India cannot die. Many of you perhaps have read the article by Professor Max Mueller in the recent issue of the 19th century headed A Real Mahatman. The life of Sri Ramakrishna is interesting, as it was a living illustration of the ideas that he preached. Perhaps it will be a little more romantic for you who live in the West in an atmosphere entirely different from that of India. For the methods and manners in the busy rush of life in the West vary entirely from those of India. Yet perhaps it will be of all the more interest for that, because it will bring into a newer light things about which many have already been heard. Which many have already heard. So now Swami is about to talk about Sri Ramakrishna. So notice, like, there's so much preamble about the Brahmo Samaj and about the British Raj and about the Mughal period. So much preamble about India and its national spirit. And now only he feels like it's time to talk about Sri Ramakrishna. It was while reforms of various kinds were being inaugurated in India that a child was born of poor Brahmin parents on the 18th of February, 1836, in one of the remote villages of Bengal. Kamarpukur. The father and mother were very orthodox people. Okay, so now let's talk about caste a little bit, because now Swamiji needs to give us some context for what it means to be a Brahmana, if you will. So he's going to say, the life of a really orthodox Brahmin is one of constant renunciation. Very few things can he do, and over and beyond them, the orthodox Brahmin must not occupy himself with any secular business. By the way, in India, we feel that Brahmanas are the most qualified to teach. Why? Because they do not make into a business the act of spiritual transmission. After all, they are forbidden by caste to enter into any kind of secular business. That which the Vaishya would have no problem doing, the Brahmana is forbidden from doing. Do you see? So if a Brahmana is a custodian of spiritual knowledge who is entrusted by the society to transmit the knowledge, then such a person is forbidden from selling knowledge. That should be a very important point to make here today with regards to the way that spirituality has become commercial. So continuing, at the same time, he must not receive gifts from just anybody. You may imagine how rigorous that life becomes. You have heard of the Brahmins and their priestcraft many times, but very few of you have ever stopped to ask what makes this wonderful band of men the rulers of their fellows. They are the poorest of all the classes in the country, and the secret of their power lies in their renunciation. See, you Westerners look at us Indians and say, caste this, caste that. You fault us for our caste, but you too have caste. The only difference is that yours is a caste of money. Yours is a caste of inflated Vaishyas who are managing to put their kids through very expensive SAT prep courses and thereby perpetuating the cycles of wealth. So don't look to us and say we have a caste problem. The difference is that we have a caste problem, but for us, the highest caste is the poorest of society, the most knowledgeable of society, the most restricted of society. Whereas for you, your highest caste is the most indulgent, least restricted, wealthiest of society. So who will judge whom? They never covet wealth. Theirs is the poorest priesthood in the world, and therefore the most powerful. Even in this poverty, a Brahmin's wife will never allow a poor man to pass through the village without giving him something to eat. That is considered the highest duty of the mother in India. And because she is the mother, it is her duty to be served last. She must see that everyone is served before her turn comes. That is why the mother is regarded as God in India. This particular woman, the mother of our subject, was the very type of a Hindu mother, was that very type of Hindu mother. The higher the caste, the greater the restrictions. The lower caste people can eat and drink anything they like. But as people rise in the social scale, more and more restrictions come. And when they reach the highest caste, the Brahmana, the hereditary priesthood of India, their lives, as I have said, are very much circumscribed. Compared to Western manners, their lives are of continuous asceticism. The Hindus are perhaps the most exclusive nation in the world. They have the same great steadiness as the English, but much more amplified. When they get hold of an idea, they carry it out to its very conclusion, and they keep hold of it generation after generation until they make something out of it. Once give them an idea, and it's not easy to take it back. It is very hard to make them grasp a new idea. So he's talking about the asceticism, the poverty, and the restrictions of the Brahmanas, but here he is also praising their conservatism. He himself is a Kshatriya, and what we've noticed in India is that reform almost always came from the Kshatriya, from Krishna, from Buddha, from Vivekananda, who were all of them of the Kshatriya frame of mind. A Brahmana, arguably, is conservative in that their role is to preserve culture. And so this can be seen as a critique almost, that once they get an idea, it's very, very hard to get them to give it up. It's very hard to take that idea back or to preach any new ideas. This is the conservatism which has made the Brahmana famous all over the world. And of course, all over India. So Abhinavagupta is, of course, a reformer. He is a very unorthodox Brahmana. But even then, he's a Brahmana nonetheless. So continuing, the Orthodox Hindus, therefore, are very exclusive, living entirely within their own horizon of thought and feeling. Their lives are laid down in our old books in every little detail, and the least detail is grasped with almost adamantine firmness by them. They would starve rather than eat a meal cooked by the hands of a man not belonging to their own small section of caste. But withal, they have intensity and tremendous earnestness. That force of intense faith and religious life occurs often among the Orthodox Hindus because their very orthodoxy comes from the tremendous conviction that it is right. We may not all think that what they hold on to with such perseverance is right, but to them it is. Now, it is written in our books that a man should always be charitable, even to the extreme. If a man starves himself to death to help another man, to save that man's life, it is all right. It is even held that a man ought to do that. And it is expected of a Brahmana to carry this idea out to the very extreme. See, you might now look at us and say we are impractical, dreamers. But this is the Oriental idea. It's better to die than to live a life in which it's all about self-preservation. What use is that life? Better to starve to feed some other man, Anyway, those who are acquainted with the literature of India will remember a beautiful story about this extreme charity, how a whole family, as related in the Mahabharata, starved themselves to death and gave their last meal to a beggar. This is not an exaggeration, for such things still happen. The character of the father and mother of my master was very much like that. Very poor they were, and yet many a time the mother would starve herself a whole day to help a poor man. Of them this child was born, and he was a peculiar child from very boyhood. He remembered his past from his birth, and was conscious for what purpose he had come into the world, and every power was devoted to the fulfillment of this purpose. While he was quite young, his father died, and the boy was sent to school. A Brahmin's boy must go to school. The caste restricts him to a learned profession only. The old system of education in India, still prevalent in many parts of the country, especially in connection with sannyasins, is very different from the modern system. The students had not to pay. This is where I get rather sentimental because this is how I saw my grandfather do it. And these ideals are very important to me. The ideal of how the student is not to be made to pay. It was thought that knowledge is so sacred that no man ought to sell it. You see, this, I think, if nothing else, is the value that I hold on to most dearly in our community. It's like selling one's own mother to sell both food and knowledge. These things must be given away freely, knowledge most of all, because there's no amount of money in the world that could properly compensate me for this knowledge. Because by this knowledge, one comes to attain that which even empires cannot give, that which even Alexander had to admit defeat when faced with, that which is what money is for. So you can't really charge for it because the moment you charge for it, you already undermine the thing that you're trying to give. Because if you really had it, why would you be charging? Now, yes, you must survive. No, no, why do you think that? Why do you think that you are entitled to a nice house, to a nice life? Are you not a Brahmana, a custodian of knowledge? Are you not a teacher of society? You're not here to eat caviar and drink fine foods, unless you are. And if so, don't pretend to be a Brahmana. In other words, don't pretend to be a teacher of spiritual knowledge when the purpose that you're giving that knowledge is for money. Then just go into some other business. The only problem is that the spiritual business is so profitable right now. So it's a good business move. But you as students of spirituality should know from whom you are learning, from a Vaishya or from a Brahmana. You can learn many great things from a Vaishya, but you should be careful because you'll also have to pay. And it's possible that you can learn better things from a Vaishya. Like, for instance, Jordan Belfort might teach you how to sell this pen. Now, I might say, what pen? It's an appearance within consciousness. You know, I won't be interested in his pen, and he won't be interested in my Brahman. Neither of us is better or worse than the other, just different. So you have to know what you're getting. If you go to a Jordan Belfort, it's better to learn how to sell the pen. That's what he's interested in, that's what he's teaching. But if you go to a spiritual teacher and they seem to be living a life of worldliness, then what are you going to get? Their knowledge hasn't given them freedom from the desires of the world. What can it do for you? You see, so I think we should judge our teachers by a very high standard. We should only accept teachings from someone who is willing to offer everything that they have for free. For such a person is only then likely fulfilled. Anyway, so this idea, knowledge is so sacred that no man ought to sell it. Knowledge must be given freely and without any price. The teachers used to take students without charge, and not only so, most of them gave their students food and clothes. To support these teachers, the wealthy families on certain occasions, such as a marriage festival or at the ceremonies of the dead, made gifts to them. They were considered the first and foremost claimants to certain gifts, and they in their turn had to maintain their students. So whenever there is a marriage, especially in a rich family, these professors are invited and they attend and discuss various subjects. So importantly, they live off of donations. So you might say, how then does the Brahmana community survive? Well, because of kings, patrons, like that. So there are people who believe in what the Brahmana is doing and so are willing to donate to the cause. But this is very important, you guys. They're not paying for spiritual knowledge. Do you see what I'm saying? They can get that for free, right? Like they can get spiritual knowledge for free. The teacher is not charging for the knowledge. However, they are paying to support the school, the teacher, and the students who the teacher is supporting. It's a very interesting idea that money is not actually for education. It's just to support the system in which education is offered freely. Do you see? So the role of the patron is very important. And there's obviously like self-interest in this too. Ideally, a person would be so inspired by the system of learning that they would freely donate in order to sustain it, in order to continue propagating a system in which knowledge could be freely received. However, the main reason why people tend to do this, though, is because they'll get merit. If there is a Brahmana, if there is a true Brahmana, which is very rare, because such a person should be a person of extreme charity, of extreme austerity, of extreme poverty. That alone qualifies a Brahmana. I'm speaking as an Indian. And I know to a Western audience, this might all sound kind of scary because, you have your self-care books and you're told that you ought to want the luxurious life. But now I'm speaking to you as an Indian of an ancient culture which has always defended the ideal of austerity, poverty, and extreme charity, even unto death. Now, such a person, this extreme Brahmana, is alone fit to be called a Brahmana. Now, if that person were to give spiritual instructions for free, it would be a very good thing. So if you were to support such a person, you would gain the merit of that thing. So like if there is a true Brahmana, then to give them money would be a meritorious act to support their school, to support their students, and to support them. So that's in your self-interest. So you donate mostly because you want the merit, but ideally it's because you believe in that system and you want to support it, okay? But now look what happens. So remember, things are changing. Things are degenerating. We've been speaking of things in their ideal form. But the ideal form is wonderful, but we should also consider their actual form from time to time. So like, this is what happened. This boy, Ramakrishna, went to one of these gatherings of professors, and the professors were discussing various topics such as logic or astronomy, subjects much beyond his age. The boy was peculiar, as I have said, and he gathered this moral out of it. This is the outcome of all their knowledge? Why are they fighting so hard? It is simply for money. The man who can show the highest learning here will get the best pair of cloth, and that is all these people are struggling for. I will not go to school anymore. That's it. Sri Ramakrishna just felt like the Brahmanas of his time were not real Brahmanas. They were Vaishyas. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. The only problem is that they had made a business out of spirituality. They live off of donations. So here they all are at some rich person's wedding trying to out-debate one another in order to be most worthy for the donation. Competing for donations, you see. Energy exchange. The energy exchange for this event is, yeah, nice tax avoidance scheme. Anyway, so he just felt like, okay, bro, like this isn't the ideal. This isn't what it means to be a Brahmana. So he was like, if this is what education is for, then I will not go to school. As he said to his elder brother Ramkumar, he said, I don't want a rice and plantains education. I don't want to just go to school for the sake of like bread. And he did not. That was the end of his going to school. But this boy had an elder brother, a learned professor, Ramkumar, who took him to Kolkata, however, to study with him. After a short time, the boy became fully convinced that the aim of all secular learning was mere material advancement and nothing more, and he resolved to give up study and devote himself solely to the pursuit of spiritual knowledge. So he was a college dropout. Isn't that beautiful? He just felt like this wasn't learning. Real learning is supposed to bring spiritual fulfillment. But most people, why are we so desperate to get into college anyway? I'm not knocking it, but we're all willing to take up so much debt to go to college. Is it really because we want to learn? Do we really care about the subjects that we're going into debt to study? Probably in most cases, it's because it's important to your parents, important to society, especially if you're first generation. It's like the way out, as it were. It's the way to assimilate into this Western culture. It's the way to get money, because that's the only value that Western culture seems to impose upon us. So why go to college? Why go to school if the only outcome of all of that is materialism? And notice, we make such a big deal of it, institutions of learning like colleges, but are they really anything more than very well planned out scams with a syllabus? You know? So that being said, um, and by the way, if you wanted to learn philosophy, do you really need to go into like student debt in order to go learn from some half-assed professors at some institutions? Couldn't you just sit under a tree and read all the great books that are available for free? Did you really need to pay all that money for a philosophy major? Is my point. That maybe we should question our motives when we try to knock on the doors of these institutions of wealth and power. Because often we find that all we're saying is, give me some, give me some. And Sri Ramakrishna felt that this was deplorable. And so he stopped going to school. Anyway, the father being dead, the family was very poor, and this boy had to make his own living. He went to a place near Kolkata and became a temple priest. To become a temple priest is thought very degrading to a Brahmin. Now, this is a point that might surprise some of you, because most Brahmanas that you will encounter are probably in a temple setting facilitating the puja. Like they are functioning priests. And this is ultimately what Sri Ramakrishna would become. He would become a priest in the temple of Kālī, or the head priest at age 19 in the Dakshineshwar temple of Kālī, you know. But watch this. It's degrading. Look what look what Swamiji is going to say about this. You see, to become a temple priest is thought very degrading to a Brahmin. Our temples are not churches in your sense of the word. They are not places for public worship, for properly speaking. There is no such thing as public worship in India. Temples are erected mostly by rich persons as a meritorious religious act. If a person has much property, he wants to build a temple. In that, he puts a symbol or an image of an incarnation of God and dedicates it to worship in the name of God. The worship is akin to that which is conducted in the Roman Catholic churches, very much like the Mass, reading certain sentences from the sacred books, waving a light before the image, and treating the image in every respect as we treat a great man. Hey, some of you were here for the Arati, you saw that, waving the lights and offering the water and offering the flowers and whatnot. Okay, this is all that is done in the temple. The man who goes to a temple is not considered thereby. Oh, this is so important. The man who goes to the temple is not considered thereby a better man than he who never goes. More properly, the latter is considered the more religious man, for religion in India is to each man his own private affair. In the house of every man there is either a little chapel or a room set apart, and there he goes morning and evening, sits down in a corner, and there does his worship. And this worship is entirely mental, for another man does not hear or know what he is doing. He sees him only sitting there, perhaps moving his fingers in a peculiar fashion, or closing his nostrils and breathing in a peculiar manner. Beyond that, he does not know what his brother is doing. Even his wife perhaps will not know. Thus, all worship is conducted in the privacy of his own home. Those who cannot afford to have a chapel go to the banks of a river or a lake, or the sea if they live at the seaside, but people sometimes go to worship in a temple by making salutations to the image. There their duty at the temple ends. Therefore, you see, it has been held from the most ancient times in our country, legislated upon by Manu, that it is a degenerating occupation to become a temple priest. Some of the books say it is so degrading as to make a Brahmana worthy of reproach. Just as with education, but in a far more intense sense with religion, there is the other idea behind it, that the temple priests who take fees for their work are making merchandise of sacred things. This is why it's so degrading. They are making merchandise of sacred things. And now, I'm just going to turn off the recording and tell you something that broke my heart. But you see, that story demonstrates to you how it's priestcraft, which is really a kind of trade. So you see, whether you're at a wedding demonstrating your knowledge in order to be like first in line for a very expensive donation, or you're at a temple performing duties, but in either case, you're doing it because you want money. And so this is why it's degenerating, because you're making, what do you call it? Like, where's the line here? There's a beautiful line here. You're making merchandise of sacred things. I love that. So it would be degenerate for a Brahmin to do this because they are making merchandise of sacred things. So friends, hopefully you can see we keep returning to the same theme over and over and over again. Spiritual knowledge is not to be bought and sold. You cannot make merchandise out of sacred things. There shall be no commerce in my father's house, my mother's house. That's the idea. Okay, so where were we? Sacred things. Okay, so you may imagine the feelings of that boy when he was forced through poverty to take up the only occupation open to him, that of a temple priest. There have been various poets in Bengal whose songs have passed down to the people. They are sung in the streets of Kolkata and in every village. Most of these are religious songs, and their one central idea, which is perhaps peculiar to the religions of India, is the idea of realization. So of course, what Swamiji is referencing here is Shyama Sangeet. Rohanji will know. But like Ram Prasad and all of these great masters like Komalakanta, like Rohanji is in that setting. So you know all about in the Bengali world, these songs, they're essentially about coming face to face with Kālī. Like, oh mother, when will long that blessed day when I shall have thy vision? So the peculiar idea in Indian spirituality is this, which I think to the credit of the American New Age was really, really popular, is that it's not about belief. It's not about just believing what a book says. It's not a rigmarole of words. It's about experience. It's about direct personal realization. This is religion. Religion is realization. The only person who has any right to talk of God is the one who's seen her. The only person who can claim to have a soul is the one who perceives it, who experiences themselves as it. So this very scientific, very rational, experience-based claim is the heart of Indian religion, that God can be seen and spoken to, and that's the goal. Anyway, there is not a book in India on religion which does not breathe this idea. Man must realize God, feel God, see God, talk to God. That is religion. The Indian atmosphere is full of stories of saintly persons having visions of God. Such doctrines form the basis of their religion, and all these ancient books and scriptures are the writings of persons who came into direct contact with spiritual facts. These books were not written for the intellect, nor can any reasoning understand them, because they were written by men who saw the things of which they wrote, and they can be understood only by men who have raised themselves to the same height. They say there is such a thing as realization even in this life, and it is open to everyone. And religion begins with the opening of this faculty, if I may call it so. This is the central idea in all religions, and this is why we may find one man with the most finished oratorical powers or the most convincing logic preaching the highest doctrines and yet unable to get people to listen to him, while we may find another, a poor man who scarcely can speak the language of his own motherland, yet half the nation worships him in his own lifetime as God. Sri Ramakrishna was very eloquent and very poetic, but he wasn't like one of those orators at that time, at the Brahmo Samaj, how they would give these fancy speeches. Sri Ramakrishna, he spoke in a very like homely village kind of way. He was very direct and very simple. And so maybe this is what Swami Vivekananda has in mind, that this man, half-naked man sitting on the cot of his room at the temple in Dakshineshwar, was able to convince 500,000 people. Half the nation worships him in his own lifetime as God, and yet another person who teaches the highest doctrine, who is such a great orator, that person can't get anybody to listen to him. You see, it's not about intellect, it's not about eloquence, it's about something else. So here you get another principle. Spirituality is caught, not taught, as Swami Prabhavanandaji would say. So it's not about the words that people use. It's not about their charisma or their intellect or their eloquence. It's about some property, some tangible but very elusive quality that is transferred between teacher and student. You know it when you feel it. And when you feel that, that's the true transmission, not necessarily what's being said, but what's being conveyed, subliminally almost, maybe. Anyway, when in India, the idea somehow or other gets abroad that a man has raised himself to that state of realization, that religion is no more a matter of conjecture to him, that he is no more groping in the dark in such momentous questions as religion, the immortality of the soul, and God. People come from all the quarters to see him, and gradually they begin to worship him. Anyway, in the temple was an image of the blissful mother. This boy had to conduct the worship morning and evening, and by degrees, this one idea filled his mind. Is there anything behind this image? Is it true that there is a mother of bliss? Sadananda Mai Kālī. Is there really a mother of bliss in this universe? Or Rohanji would say, Shodananda Moi Kālī. Shodananda Moi Kālī. Is there really this mother of bliss in this universe? Is it true that she lives and guides this universe, or is it all a dream? Is there any reality in religion? This was Sri Ramakrishna's burning question. And it's right that we should ask this question. Why should we just accept everything on faith? So he asked the most important question of our day and age, in our scientific, rational world. Like, can this be verified? That was the question that he asked. This skepticism comes to the Hindu child. It is the skepticism of our country. Is this that we are doing real? And theories will not satisfy us, although there are ready at hand almost all the theories that have ever been made with regard to God and the soul. Neither books nor theories can satisfy us. The one idea that gets hold of thousands of our people is this idea of realization. Is it true that there is a God? If it be true, can I see him? Can I realize the truth? The Western mind may think all this very impracticable, but to us it is intensely practical. For this idea, men will give up their lives. You have just now heard how from the earliest times there have been persons who have given up all comforts and luxuries to live in caves, and hundreds have given up their homes to weep bitter tears of misery on the banks of sacred rivers in order to realize this idea. Not to know in the ordinary sense of the world, not intellectual understanding, not a mere rationalistic comprehension of the real thing, not mere groping in the dark, but intense realization, much more real than this world is to our senses. That is the idea. I do not advance any position as to that just now, but that is the one fact that is impressed upon them. Thousands will be killed, other thousands will be ready. So upon this one idea, the whole nation for thousands of years have been denying and sacrificing themselves. For this idea, thousands of Hindus every year give up their homes, and many of them die through the hardships they have to undergo. Swamiji nearly died several times. To the Western mind, this must seem most visionary, and I can see the reason for this point of view, but though I have resided in the West, I still think this idea is the most practical thing in life. Now, I was in Varanasi recently, and coming out of the Telang Swami temple, I was walking down the steps to Panchaganga Ghat. Now, Tralanga Swami's temple, his ashrama, his Mahasamadhi is just by where Kabir took his Diksha. So I'm walking down the steps, and there's a beautiful full moon overhead, and it's so quiet. There's like nobody there. It's just, I feel like it's just Vijaya, me, and the Ganga lapping at the shores with some lighted boats in the distance. And so I squat down to do a Shiva puja there with a new lingam that I had picked up, and I'm pouring the Ganga water and saying the mantras, completely convinced that I'm all by myself. And it was such a beautiful feeling because there were all these little cubbies, like holes, that probably at one time in history, in this ancient city, was the home of some sadhu, some unknown mendicant who maybe lived and died in that cave chanting the name of God. Several of them have been converted into little shrines, maybe by their disciples. And so there are lingams in many of these, maybe honoring some great saint who has come and died in anonymity, known perhaps only to his students, and maybe not even that, maybe known only to the dogs that were wandering about at that time. So anyway, I'm moved by the romance of all of this as I'm doing my Shiva Puja. Then I stand up and I walk up the steps, and there are these like platforms in Panchaganga Ghat, there are like these like platforms like that. And they're like kind of housed a little bit. So I like kind of thatched roof like that. So I walk up and suddenly there's this man. And I didn't see him walking down the Ganga. He was so quiet. And when I looked at him, he didn't see me. That's the best thing about this person. His eyes were open. He was looking right at me. He had matted like hair, but not matted in that like salon way, it's just matted because he just left it, and a beard. And he was maybe in his 50s, 40s, or 50s. Hard to tell because when you live out in the sun like that, your skin gets so leathery. He could have been 20s, 30s. I don't know. But I'm looking at him and he's wrapped in just like one blanket. And he's just kind of sitting there in the corner so quietly by himself, like a shadow. You can barely see him, except for the glimmer in his eyes, the way the moon reflected in his eyes. And he looked right past me in a sense. He was absorbed in his own world. And then I stood there for a little bit, just kind of looking at him. And he wasn't looking at me, he was absorbed. And I was thinking, who will ever know this man? And yet, we owe him everything. The fact that he is here. He has a mother and father somewhere, probably, who he hasn't spoken to. They might not even know whether he's alive or dead. He might never have had parents. He might have been one of those wandering street urchins in India who took to this holy life. Where is his guru? Maybe his guru, he met him once and that's it. Met her or met them once and that's it. Does he have anyone in this world? Because he seemed sitting there completely by himself and totally content. He didn't even have a dog with him, which some sadhus tend to have. He was just by himself, absorbed in his own mood, and blished the fuck out. You could see it. I don't know anything about him. He could have been starving, and maybe the next day he could have been an opium addict. I don't know anything about him. But from looking at him, it was so soul stirring to think that it all comes down to this: the fact that for not centuries, for not millennia, but for aeons, many of us in India have been doing this, and all over the world too, just leaving everything behind and sitting on the banks of rivers and weeping bitter tears and living and dying in absolute obscurity. Because for us, this is the one thing worth living for, the one thing most worth dying for, this intense realization of God. And it proceeds from a skepticism. Can you imagine all of this to be contextualized in the first claim? Is that Sri Ramakrishna was skeptical. So like my guru's guru, Swami Brahmananda would say, like, don't you just want to know? Don't you want to find out whether God is real? Don't you want to see whether there's perennial bliss and joy? Just out of that skepticism comes this quest. Isn't that beautiful? It's the most practical thing. Just look and see. And it's worth dying for, trying to look and trying to see. Anyway, every moment I think of anything else is so much lost to me. Even the marvels of earthly sciences, everything is vain if it takes me away from that thought. Life is but momentary. Whether you have the knowledge of an angel or the ignorance of an animal, life is but momentary. Whether you have the poverty of the poorest man in rags or the wealth of the richest living person, life is but momentary. Whether you are downtrodden, living in one of the big streets of the big cities of the West, or a crowned emperor ruling over millions, life is but momentary. Whether you have the best health or the worst, life is but momentary. Whether you have the most poetical temperament or the most cruel, there is but one solution of life, says the Hindu. And that solution is what they call God and religion. If these be true, life becomes explained, life becomes bearable, life becomes enjoyable. Otherwise, life is but a useless burden. That is our idea. But no amount of reasoning can demonstrate it. It can only make it probable. and there it rests. The highest demonstration of reasoning that we have in any branch of knowledge can only make a fact probable and nothing further. The most demonstrable facts of physical science are only probabilities. They are not facts yet. Facts are only in the senses. Facts have to be perceived, and we have to perceive religion to demonstrate it to ourselves. We have to sense God to be convinced that there is a God. We must sense the facts of religion to know that they are facts. Nothing else, and no amount of reasoning, but our own perceptions can make these things real to us, can make my belief firm as a rock. That is my idea, and that is the Indian idea. This idea took possession of the boy, and his whole life, Jaima, Natalie Ma, Jaima, his whole life became concentrated upon that. Day after day, he would weep and say, Mother, is it true that thou existest? Or is it all poetry? Is the blissful mother an imagination of poets and misguided people? Or is there such a reality? We have seen that of books, of education, in our sense of the word, he had none. And so much the more natural, so much the more healthy was his mind, so much purer his thoughts, undiluted by drinking in the thoughts of others. So here Sri Ramakrishna is praising originality, which you'll see is a theme that he picks up again and again in his religious discourses. Like, we shouldn't imitate anybody. Imitation is death. So a lot of the spiritual teachers that we find in the world, it's imitation. They're not teaching from their own hearts. They're not teaching what they believe. They're merely parroting a tradition or a culture. They're putting on the right outfit. They're saying the right words, but it might not be authentic to them. But if maybe they were to take the time to think about what's their true calling, they might not feel like they need to imitate anybody. And that's an interesting idea that, like, this man, Sri Ramakrishna, wasn't able to imitate anybody because he wasn't exposed to any ideas. In one sense, that's good. In another sense, obviously, that's problematic. But in this sense, he was all the healthier for it. His mind was all the purer. Isn't that beautiful? Um, anyway, because he did not go to the university, therefore he thought for himself. Because we have spent half our lives in the university, we are filled with a collection of other people's thoughts. Well, as Professor Max Mueller said in the article I have just referred to, that this was a clean, original man. And the secret of that originality was that he was not brought up within the precincts of a university. This is the secret to the Buddha. He just left behind all formal institutions of learning, and he just decided to learn from life, from himself. Obviously, he had gurus, but now he's willing to be original, to have original and authentic thought. To be a philosopher really means that. To be a philosopher does not mean looking into books. A good philosopher reads books, right? But a real philosopher, a great philosopher, studies life. More importantly, studies your own life, the movements of their own heart, the stirrings of their own soul. However, this thought, whether God can be seen, which was the uppermost thought in his mind, gained in strength every day until he could think of nothing else. He could no more conduct the worship properly, could no more attend to the various details in all their minuteness. Often, he would forget to place the food offering before the image. Sometimes he would forget to wave the light. At other times, he would wave it for hours and forget everything else. And that one idea was in his mind every day. Is it true that thou existest, O mother? Why dost thou not speak? Art thou dead? Perhaps some of us here will remember that there are moments in our lives when, tired of all these ratiocinations of dull and dead logic, tired of plodding through books, which after all teach us nothing, become nothing but a sort of intellectual opium eating, we must have it at stated times or we die. Tired with all of this, the heart of our heart sends out a wail. Is there no one in this universe who can show me the light? If thou art that, show the light unto me. Why dost thou not speak? Why dost thou make thyself so scarce? Why send so many messengers and not thyself come to me? In this world of fights and factions, who am I to follow and believe? If thou art the God of every man and woman alike, why comest thou not to speak to thy child and see if he is not ready? Well, to us all come such thoughts in moments of great depression, but such are the temptations surrounding us that the next moment we forget. For the moment it seemed that the doors of the heavens were going to be opened. For that moment it seemed as if we were going to plunge into the light effulgent. But the animal man again shakes off all these angelic visions. Down we go, animal man once more, eating and drinking and dying and drinking and eating again and again. But there are exceptional minds which are not turned away so easily, which once attracted can never be turned back, whatever may be the temptations in the way, which want to see the truth, knowing that life must go. They say, let it go in a noble conquest. And what conquest is nobler than the conquest of the lower nature, than this solution of the problem of life and of death and of good and of evil? At last, it became impossible for him to serve in the temple. He left it and entered into a little wood that was near and lived there. About this part of his life, he told me many times that he could not tell when the sun rose or set, nor how he lived. He lost all thought of himself and forgot to eat. During this period, he was lovingly watched over by a relative who put into his mouth food which he mechanically swallowed. Days and nights thus passed with the boy. When a whole day would pass, towards the evening, when the peal of the bells in the temple and the voices singing would reach the wood, it would make the boy very sad, and he would cry, "Another day is gone in vain, mother, and thou hast not come. Another day of this short life has gone, and I have not known the truth." In the agony of his soul, sometimes he would rub his face against the ground and weep, and this one prayer burst forth, "Do thou manifest thyself in me, thou mother of the universe. See that I need thee, and nothing else." Verily, he wanted to be true to his own ideal. He had heard that the mother never came until everything had been given up for her. He had heard that the mother wanted to come to everyone, but they would not have her. That people wanted all sorts of foolish little idols to pray to. That they wanted their own enjoyments and not the mother. And that the moment they really wanted her with their whole soul and nothing else, that moment she would come. So he began to break himself into that idea. He wanted to be exact, even on the plane of matter. He threw away all the little property he had and took a vow that he would never touch money. And this one idea, "I will not touch money," became a part of him. It may appear to be something occult, but even in afterlife when he was sleeping, if I touched him with a piece of money, his hand would become bent and his whole body would become, as it were, paralyzed. The monks of our order make this joke. So when Sri Ramakrishna would touch any kind of coin, like of silver or gold, during a certain time in his life, his hand would like kind of recoil as if stung by a scorpion. So the monks of our order say, we too have that same condition. Whenever somebody hands us money, our arms too get bent. Only they get bent like this. They're like, "Whoa!" Anyway, but literally his hand would like recoil when touched with money because of the strength of his conviction. It may appear to be something occult. The other idea that came into his mind was that lust was the other enemy. Man is a soul, and soul is sexless, neither man nor woman. The idea of sex and the idea of money were the two things, he thought, that prevented him from seeing the mother. This may be true or it may be false, but this was Sri Ramakrishna's conviction from what he had heard and from what he had realized. He felt as if the only things keeping him from a direct, immediate perception of God was this fascination with money and with sex. And now look at what he says. And again, there are entire traditions of spirituality that will disagree with this. And I myself have advocated many of them. Because arguably, the problem here is not with sex or with money. You see, it's something else. And he's talking about materialism, which is something very different from what the Kaula Marga conceives of when it comes to these things, for instance. But here he's saying, the other idea that came into his mind was that lust was the other enemy. Man is a soul, and soul is sexless, neither man nor woman. The idea of sex and the idea of money were the two things he thought that prevented him from seeing the mother. These are his original thoughts, yes? This whole universe is the manifestation of the mother, and she lives in every woman's body. Every woman represents the mother. How can I think of woman in a mere sex relation? That was the idea. Every woman was his mother, and he must bring himself to the state when he would see nothing but mother in every woman. And he carried it out in his life. It's remarkable to me how a lot of this anticipates the problems of consumer capitalism, because in our tradition of consumer capitalism, we reduce everything to its material value. So it's not just that women's bodies become means to an end, or commercial products unto themselves, but it's that nature which is conceived of as feminine too becomes means to an end. So no longer do we look upon nature as mother, because no longer do we regard woman as mother. And if we were to look upon woman as mother, we would have a very different way of revering her and approaching her. But if we look upon woman as lover or as consort or as partner, that changes the dynamic a little bit. It becomes relational in one sense. And Sri Ramakrishna felt like he could not see God as mother if he didn't also apply that to every female body that he encountered. Because after all, it says in the Chandi that every woman is the divine mother. She is literally an incarnation of Kālī. Any real Shakta has to admit that, because our scriptures say so. So all women are Ma. But if all women are Ma, then should you not feel about them the way that you feel about Ma? The thing about Oedipus, and this is, I think, what Freud gets wrong, is that he was horrified in the end when he realized that it was his mother. Like, all the while, he was under the impression that Jocasta was not his mother, and therefore he was perfectly happy to go into bed with her. But then later, when he realized that it was his mother all along, he, like, literally gouged his own eyes out, which I think is an interesting idea, that, like, Freud aside and all sorts of notions along those lines aside, most of us don't have sexual feelings for our mother. Probably if the very thought comes to mind, it's immediately checked with, but this is the source of all compassion and love. I don't see her as a woman's body because we don't look at a mom as a body. We look at her as a principle almost, if you will. And so Sri Ramakrishna, just along the lines of his Shakta revelation, felt that it is Ma alone who abides in the form of every woman's body. So every woman was his mother. And so he brought himself to the state where he would see nothing but mother in every woman, and he carried it out in his life. This is the tremendous thirst that seizes the human heart. Later on, this very man said to me, "My child, suppose there is a bag of gold in one room and a robber in the next room. Do you think that robber can sleep? He cannot. His mind will always be thinking how to get into that room and obtain possessions of that gold. Do you think then that a man firmly persuaded that there is a reality behind all these appearances, that there is a God, that there is a one who never dies, one who is infinite bliss, a bliss compared with which these pleasures of the senses are simply playthings? Can such a person rest contented without struggling to attain it? Can he cease his efforts for a moment? No, he will become mad with longing." This divine madness seized the boy. At the time, he had no teacher, nobody to tell him anything. And everyone thought he was out of his mind. This is the ordinary condition of things. If a man throws aside the vanities of the world, we hear him called mad. But such men are the salt of the earth. Out of such madness have come the powers that have moved this world of ours. And out of such madness alone will come the powers of the future that are going to move the world. So, days, weeks, months passed in continuous struggle of the soul to arrive at truth. The boy began to see visions, to see wonderful things. The secrets of his nature were beginning to open to him. Veil after veil as it were being taken off. Mother herself became the teacher and initiated the boy into the truths that he sought. At this time there came to this place a woman of beautiful appearance, learned beyond compare. Later on, this saint used to say that about her that she was not learned, but was the very embodiment of learning. She was learning itself in human form. So he's talking about Bhairavi Brahmani, which is Sri Ramakrishna's Tantric Guru. There too you find the peculiarity of the Indian nation. Yes, Manitji, it's Bhairavi Brahmani. In the midst of the ignorance in which the average Hindu woman lives, in the midst of what is called in Western countries her lack of freedom, there could arise a woman of this supreme spirituality. I mean, just think of what you were saying. In this Western world, do you have female priests in your Catholic church? I don't see them. You have nuns, but they're cloistered away in some corner. Where are your women of authority in spiritual life? You had a female pope once, actually. At one point of your Catholic history, there was a female pope. But of course, that kind of tradition didn't last. But look at us. In India, you say about our women that they're so degenerate, and yet see, they're gurus. They're spiritual authorities. They're lineage founders. These women are treated like ranis, like queens, by their communities of disciples. So in Western countries, we say that women lack their freedom. But then how could there arise such a woman like this of supreme spirituality? She was a sannyasini. For women also give up the world. They throw away their property. They do not marry and devote themselves to the worship of the Lord. She came, and when she heard of this boy in the grove, she offered to go and see him, and hers was the first help he received. At once she recognized what his trouble was, and she said to him, "My son, blessed is the man upon whom such madness comes. The whole of this universe is mad, some for wealth, some for pleasure, and some for fame, some for 100 other things. They are mad for gold, or husbands, or wives, or for little trifles, mad to tyrannize over somebody, mad to become rich, mad for every foolish thing except God. And they can understand only their own madness. When another man is mad after gold, they have fellow feeling and sympathy for him, and they say he is the right man, as lunatics think that other lunatics alone are sane. But if a man is mad after the beloved, after the Lord, how can they understand? They think he has gone crazy, and they say, have nothing to do with him. That is why they call you mad, but yours is the right kind of madness. Blessed is the man who is mad after God. Such men are very few. This woman remained near the boy for years, taught him the forms of religion of India, initiated him in the different practices of yoga, and as it were guided and brought into harmony this tremendous river of spirituality. Later, there came to the same grove a sannyasin, one of the begging friars of India, a learned man, a philosopher. He was a peculiar man. He was an idealist. He did not believe that this world existed in reality, and to demonstrate that, he would never go under a roof. He would always live out of doors, in storm and sunshine alike. This man began to teach the boy the philosophy of the Vedas, and he found very soon, to his astonishment, that the pupil was in some respects wiser than the master. He spent several months with the boy, after which he initiated him into the order of the sannyasins and took his departure. When, as a temple priest, his extraordinary worship made people think him deranged in his head, his relatives took him home and married him to a little girl, thinking that this would turn his thoughts and restore the balance of his mind. But he came back and, as we have seen, merged deeper in his madness. Sometimes, in our country, boys are married as children and have no choice in the matter. Their parents marry them. Of course, such a marriage is little more than a betrothal. When they are married, they shall continue to live with their parents, and the real marriage takes place when the wife grows older. Then it is customary for the husband to go and bring his bride to his own home. In this case, however, the husband had entirely forgotten he had had a wife. In her far-off home, the girl had heard that her husband had become a religious enthusiast, and that he was even considered insane by many. She resolved to learn the truth for herself. So, the Indian attitude of trying to realize the truth rather than going by hearsay. So she set out and walked to the place where her husband was. And this is no joke. I mean, it's many days of just walking endlessly through dacoit territory, like where there are thugs and robbers and whatnot. And she nearly died. She contracted a very serious fever. Anyway, so she's walking and walking. And when at last she stood in her husband's presence, he at once admitted her to his life. Although in India, any person, man or woman who embraces a religious life is thereby freed from all other obligations. The young man fell at the feet of his wife and said, "As for me, the mother has shown me that she resides in every woman, and so I have learned to look upon every woman as mother. That is the one idea I can have about you. But if you wish, as I have been married to you, if you wish to live a worldly life, I am at your service." I mean, oh my God, listen to this. Just think about this. This is Swami Vivekananda's testimony that when Holy Mother Sarada Devi, a young woman in the prime of her youth, arrived at the temple, Sri Ramakrishna, who had given his whole life to religion, was willing to give it all up for his wife. Just think about that. He fell at her feet and said, "I look upon you as the mother of the universe. I can't help but look upon you as a mother. But if you would want of me that we make love and that we enjoy the pleasures of the world, like that would be fine. I am at your service." Do you see how this wasn't a fanatical kind of bigot? It wasn't a hatred of the world. It wasn't a kind of transcendentalism that scowled at the world as an illusion. He was perfectly willing to like make love to his wife if she so desired it. Isn't that so beautiful? I mean, this thought like blows my mind. That his devotion to the Divine Mother meant above all his devotion to his actual mother and his like actual wife. Like, how can you say you worship Kālī when you mistreat the women in your life? After all, as a Shakta, you yourself said every woman is an embodiment of Kālī. How then can you see them as means to an end? Would you not give your life for them? Would you not treat them as veritable devis on earth? Similarly, if one happened to be your wife, then would you not fall at her feet and say, "Whatever you want of me, mother, I shall do"? This romance, where do you get this kind of thing? And so some people criticize, like, oh, look at this relationship. Poor Holy Mother, like Sri Ramakrishna never made love to her. But that's not actually true. They used to share the same bed. They used to talk all night. It's just that our conceptions of making love are very limited. We think that if we put this piece into that piece and we call that making love, then we'll be satisfied. But there are many much more refined ways to commune with another soul. And Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, they were established in that plane. Arguably, they communed in samadhi, but really, who knows about these kinds of things? But this statement is important. He's saying, as for me, the Divine Mother has shown me that she resides in every woman, and so I have learned to look upon every woman as the mother. That is the one idea I can have about you. But because I've been married to you, I'm at your service. The maiden was a noble soul and was able to understand her husband's aspirations and sympathize with them. She quickly told him that she had no wish to drag him down to a life of worldliness, but that all she desired was to remain near him, to serve him, and to learn of him. She became one of his most devoted disciples, always revering him as the divine being. Thus, through his wife's consent, the last barrier was removed, and he was free to lead the life that he had chosen. How beautiful. Oh, also, I want to make this point. There was one night, I think it's very significant, because lots of people, they go too far with what I'm saying. On one end are people who are indulging in materialism, who put on a spiritual front in order to take your money, etc. But on the other end, there are people who are indulging in the pride, vanity, and egoism of asceticism. So they're saying like, oh, but they're repressed, you see. Like, they don't like the world, they don't like money, they don't like sex. But it's a front. They do like those things. It's just that they like their pride of being ascetics more, if you will. So Sri Ramakrishna was not like that. he was very natural and sweet when it came to these beautiful and natural stirrings of the soul. So the only thing that we have to avoid is not in this life sex or money, it's hypocrisy. So what happened one night was Sri Ramakrishna in the middle of the night looked at the body of his wife and said to himself, this is that which men covet all their lives, the body of a young woman. Like, this is one thing in this world to be enjoyed. Like, this is what makes the world beautiful. Oh, my mind, let there not be let there not be theft in the chamber of the heart, which is an adage to say, may I not be a hypocrite. If you want this, have it. Don't want it and say you don't want it. If you want it, have it. And so he reached his hand out in order to begin some kind of romantic exchange with his lawfully wedded wife in their bed, in their room, at their home, right? Like, and at that moment, as he was reaching for the body, he went into samadhi. Isn't that so beautiful and so natural? Like, he's so honest, so radically honest about his own desires. And he was willing to, like, test things out. And so I think the only problem here is hypocrisy when spiritual teachers or spiritual leaders present as being one thing, but in fact, they are something else. And so if we could just all be honest, that would be, I think, very important. Honest with our intentions. But part of being honest with our intentions is, I think, coming to be okay with sex and money in one sense. If that's really what you want, then you shouldn't feel as if it's wrong to want those things. Because if you feel that, if you have that shame and guilt around sex and money, then what's going to happen is that you're going to like deny that and pretend that you don't want that. And sooner or later, the desire for that will come out in some kind of perverse and roundabout way. In other words, you'll try to get it in adharmic means if you don't allow yourself to pursue it through dharmic means. And all that comes down to being really honest with yourself. And Sri Ramakrishna was. And not only that, he expressed to his wife what his ideal was, and yet he was willing to sacrifice all of that just out of love and compassion for his partner. And, to her credit, she totally understood what Sri Ramakrishna was about, and she herself was interested in that kind of thing. So anyway, the next desire that seized upon the soul of this man was to know the truth about the various religions. Up to that time, he had not known any religion but his own. He wanted to understand what other religions were like. So, he sought teachers of other religions. By teachers, you must always remember what we mean in India is not a bookworm, but a person of realization, a person who knows truth at first hand and not through an intermediary. He found a Mohammedan saint and placed himself under him. He underwent the disciplines prescribed by him, and to his astonishment found that when he faithfully carried out these devotional methods, they led him to the same goal that he had already attained. He gathered similar experiences from following the true religion of Jesus the Christ. He went to all the sects he could find, and whatever he took up, he went into with his whole heart. He did exactly as he was told, and in every instance he arrived at the same result. Thus, from actual experience, he came to know that the goal of every religion is the same, that each is trying to teach the same thing, the difference being largely in method and still more in language. At the core, all sects and all religions have the same aim. And they were only quarreling for their own selfish purposes. They were not anxious about the truth, but about my name and your name. Two of them preached the same truth, but one of them said, that cannot be true because I have not put upon it the seal of my name. Therefore, do not listen to him. And the other man said, do not hear him, although he is preaching very much the same thing, yet it is not true because he does not preach it in my name. That is why my master found, and he then set about to learn humility. Because he had found that the one idea in all religions is not me, but thou. And he who says not me, the Lord fills his heart. The less of this little I, the more of God there is in him. That he found to be the truth in every religion in the world. And he set himself to accomplish this. So just like, I hope you can see the way these ideas are developing in the arc of Sri Ramakrishna sadhana. First, he was obsessed with this idea of overcoming money. Then he was obsessed with this idea of overcoming sexuality, or like seeing people as bodies and as means to a sensual, gratifying end. Then he became obsessed with this idea of the harmony of all religions. And so he obsessively practiced all the religions one by one until he realized the truth in each. And then he became obsessed with this next idea called selflessness. He felt after his experiments that the essence of religion is this ability to say, not me, not I, but thy will alone be done. That's the essence. The essence is a kind of self-abnegation, a kind of selflessness. And so here's what happened. And this is interesting. This experiment in selflessness. He says, as I have told you, whenever he wanted to do anything, he never confined himself to mere theory or fine theories, but would enter into the practice immediately. We see many persons talking the most wonderfully fine things about charity and about equality and about the rights of other people and all that, but it is only in theory. I was so fortunate as to find one who was able to carry theory into practice. He had the most wonderful faculty of carrying everything into practice, which he thought was right. So, by the way, as an aside, I'm not saying that all of these thoughts should be your thoughts, by the way. I'm not saying that you need to give up sex and money and become super selfless and like practice all the religions until you realize that they're all essentially one. The thing to take away from this is that when he felt that something was true and when something was right, he gave his whole being to like living according to it, to carrying it out. That's the thing maybe to take away. And that's going to be different for each and every one of us, what we feel in our heart to be right and true. But we should not be confined to a mere theory. We should be willing to live that out to its logical conclusion, if only for the sake of experience and learning. Anyway, there was a family of pariahs living near the place. The pariahs number several millions in the whole of India and are a sect of people so low that some of our books say that if a brahmana coming out of his house sees the face of a pariah, he has to fast that day and recite certain prayers before he becomes holy again. In some Hindu cities, when a pariah enters, he has to put a crow's feather on his head as a sign that he is a pariah, and he has to cry out aloud, "Save yourself! The pariah is passing through the streets." And you will find people flying off from him as if by magic, because if they touch him by chance, they will have to change their clothes, bathe, and do other things. And the pariah for thousands of years has believed that it is perfectly right, that his touch will make everybody unholy. Now, this is a great example of misunderstanding scripture, a misunderstanding of the tradition. This is the outcome, that a person feels himself to be disempowered and the rest of society believes it too. And this is a case of extreme fanaticism, which comes from, I think, a mystery mongering, a kind of superstitionalism. In any case, this is an important context for what's going to happen next. Now, my master would go to a pariah and ask to be allowed to clean his house. The business of the pariah is to clean the streets of the cities and to keep houses clean. He cannot enter the house by the front door. By the back door he enters, and as soon as he is gone, the whole place over which he has passed is sprinkled with and made holy by a little Ganga water. By birth, the Brahmins stand for holiness, and the pariah for the very reverse. And this Brahmin asked to be allowed to do the menial services in the house of the pariah. The pariah, of course, could not allow that, for they all think that if they allow a Brahmin to do such menial work, it will be an awful sin, and they will become extinct. The pariah would not permit it, so in the dead of night, when all were sleeping, Ramakrishna would enter the house. He had long hair, and with his hair he would wipe the place, saying, "O my mother, make me the servant of the pariah. Make me feel that I am even lower than the pariah. They worship me best who worship my worshippers. They are all my children, and your privilege is to serve them," is the teaching of Hindu scriptures. And the Christ said something similar too. He said, "That which you do unto the least of ye, you do also unto me." So this is a principle. By the way, after I finish with this deluge of profound ideas, I'm going to read you a list. Like it's, I think, going to be kind of helpful to put all of this into a kind of manifesto, if you will. So with all of these ideas on the table, I'm just gonna present a list. I have it on my phone. It's just like 4 or 5 items, and they're just like the ideals of our community or the things that I think are required so that we can remain a community of spiritual integrity. And not only are they like, I think, very special and important to me and to our community as kind of like our guidelines, but I think they can be helpful also to other spiritual teachers and other communities as teachings, if you will, from the life of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda that address the rampant materialism and commercialism of spirituality in this day and age, in all days and ages, you know. Okay. Anyway, there were various other preparations which would take a long time to relate. I want to give you just a sketch of his life. For years, he thus educated himself. One of the sadhanas was to root out the sex idea. Soul has no sex. It is neither male nor female. It is only in the body that sex exists, and the man who desires to reach the spirit cannot at the same time hold to sex distinctions. Having been born in a masculine body, this man wanted to bring the feminine idea into everything. He began to think that he was a woman. He dressed like a woman, spoke like a woman, gave up the occupations of men, and lived in the household among the women of a good family, until after years of this discipline, his mind became changed, and he entirely forgot the idea of sex. Thus, the whole view of life became changed to him. We hear in the West about worshipping woman, but this is usually for her youth and beauty. This man meant by worshipping woman that to him every woman's face was that of the blissful mother, and nothing but that. Abhinavagupta, it's so funny. In one place, I kid you not, Abhinavagupta says, "Isn't it convenient that you are calling everybody Devi, but the only people you seem to want to call Devi are young women?" Like Abhinavagupta is saying you have to worship all women. If your idea is that women are the divine mother, then you cannot be selective about which women you worship and which women you don't. This has to be true of all women. And that means it cannot take into consideration anything like age or your own personal preferences, your sexual taste, your romantic taste, your personality taste. It can't take into consideration anything that would distinguish one woman from another. For the Shakta, for the person who would take up this very radical path, every woman's face is another face of the Divine Mother, whoever she might be. And anybody who identifies. So please forgive me for suddenly dropping in the middle of the lecture because the internet cut out and actually it came back on. You know what's interesting? It came back on, but it like reset. So the Wi-Fi name in my building is What Disruptive Rock Music, but then it reset and it went back to like My Spectrum 851, something like that. So like it was actually there the whole time. Just like how it is in spiritual life, what we're looking for is always in front of us, and yet I wasn't able to see it because I was looking for it under another name. So forgive me. So we had to stop the talk like right in the middle, or like not in the middle, towards the very end, right before we made one final point. I think I just want to wrap things up and just offer some concluding remarks for the sake of like a finished loop, if you will, so we can finish this discussion because we were onto some pretty good stuff, I think. I think we were talking about some really important foundational material. So I'm just going to return to that last bit of the reading, which we finished off with last time. And then I'll make a few closing, concluding remarks. And then maybe if you'd like, we can just read through the rest of the essay, or not the lecture called My Master. So here we go. The last thing that I was trying to read out to you before the internet dropped is as follows. We hear in the West about worshipping woman, but this is usually for her youth and beauty. This man, and by this man we mean Sri Ramakrishna, meant by worshipping woman that to him every woman's face was that of the blissful mother, and nothing but that. I myself have seen this man standing before those women whom society would not touch, and falling at their feet, bathed in tears, saying, "Mother, in one form thou art in the street, and in another form thou art the universe. I salute thee, mother, I salute thee." Just think of the blessedness of that life from which all carnality has vanished, which can look upon every woman with that love and reverence when every woman's face becomes transfigured and only the face of the Divine Mother, the blissful one, the protectress of the human race, shines upon it. That is what we want. Do you mean to say that the divinity back of a woman can ever be cheated? It never was and never will be. It always asserts itself. Unfailingly, it detects fraud. It detects hypocrisy. Unerringly, it feels the warmth of truth, the light of spirituality, the holiness of purity. Such purity is absolutely necessary if real spirituality is to be attained. So the call here is to see everybody, each and everybody, literally everybody, as nothing but a murti of the Divine Mother. The body is divine through and through, and all of its emissions are divine. And that's the Kaula modality that menses can be offered in ritual to the Divine Mother, for it is divine. Just like the 5 things that come from a cow are all divine, we get milk, we get curd, we get ghee, and we get cow urine and cow dung, which are very important in Indian society. We use cow urine and cow dung as like disinfectants, and cow dung is a very important natural source of fuel and whatnot. We can use it to cool down our houses, and it's a very, very important substance, but they all come from the cow. And so these are called panchagavyas. They're sacred because they come from the cow, which is a sacred being who represents motherhood and sattva par excellence. Similarly, is this body not sacred? In fact, in this body, and particularly in a woman's body, as indeed we learn in the Chandi, the Divine Mother is manifest to a greater degree. All bodies are female in the sense that all bodies are manifestations of Prakriti. So in that philosophical sense, all biological gender and all sociological and mental gender aside, in a philosophical sense, everything is Prakriti. So all bodies are bodies of the Divine Mother. So this doesn't just have to apply to the woman's body as we understand that term biologically and sociologically. This applies to literally everybody. And being able to see everybody as God is a very important thing, because you don't treat God as a commodity to be bought and sold. You don't treat God as a means to an end, at least I hope not. You treat God as an ends unto itself, which is worship worthy, which is a revelation of great reverence. So this idea that until a spiritual teacher can look upon everybody as God incarnate, until they can see the shining, resplendent, blissful face of the mother in that face, then they will only ever really worship youth and beauty, which are only skin deep. Beauty is far deeper than what our societies and what our minds like to project. And that beauty is God's beauty, for God is beauty incarnate. So, having said that, this is a very high standard, and it's very important for both spiritual teachers and spiritual aspirants to follow this. Obviously, Sri Ramakrishna, as a heterosexual man, practiced specific sadhanas in order to be able to see every woman as his own mother. In the reading that we did this morning, actually, he said, I regard the breast of every woman that I meet as the breast of my own mother. He said, one in worshipping Shakti can take up a hero's attitude, where one tries to please her the way you would please a woman through intercourse. And that's a perfectly valid way to approach the sadhana. But Sri Ramakrishna said, I never worship the Divine Mother in that way. I preferred the attitude of a child. So this was his mode. He preferred to see the Divine Mother as his mother, and then naturally he's going to project that onto every woman that he meets. And that protected him, as it were, from what you might call lust or kind of sexual attraction that is really rooted in the body and a kind of spiritually debilitating thing. And especially in spiritual communities, a somewhat dangerous thing, because there are asymmetries of power sometimes, and spiritual teachers who don't practice this attitude of seeing everyone as God might easily fall into the trap of projecting romance or sensuality into a relationship that really shouldn't be that. At least it can be dangerous if it is that. And notice the last thing that he says here is so beautiful. Do you mean to say that the divinity back of a woman can ever be cheated? And so many spiritual teachers and spiritual communities and so much of the world is an attempt to like trick a woman into forgetting that she is the Divine Mother. But then Swamiji is saying it just cannot be done. The dignity of the woman is such that it's untarnished. Like, do you mean to say that the divinity back of a woman can ever be cheated? Just today I was speaking to somebody, and she's a very powerful practitioner whose name is the name of the Divine Mother. But she was having a rather difficult time in the setting that she was in, and she felt like she had seen herself as Sri Ramakrishna's maid in a sense. She felt like she was doing service for Sri Ramakrishna, but that didn't feel right. So she spoke to another devotee, and the devotee said to her, you're not Sri Ramakrishna's maid, you're Sri Ramakrishna's child. And that created a deep shift within. And she started feeling like, you're right. I love Sri Ramakrishna, and he loves me, and therefore I'm doing his service, not as a slave, but as a child. And then today, as I was speaking to her, I was saying, let's go further. You're not just his child, you're his mother. And that's the way he would have treated you. For you are the Divine Mother incarnate. So you're not Thakur's child. Of course you are. Everyone is. But in a deeper sense, you are the Divine Mother itself, which Thakur worshipped. That's an important idea. By Thakur, I mean Sri Ramakrishna. So this innate dignity of the woman, and again, that doesn't have to mean in terms of biology or in terms of sociology, is something that can never be cheated. So he's saying, do you mean to say that the divinity back of a woman can ever be cheated? It never was and never will be. It always asserts itself. Unfailingly, it detects fraud. It detects hypocrisy. Unerringly, it feels the warmth of truth, the light of spirituality, the holiness of purity. So the point I want to make here, with regards to the many, many emails I get, many of them from very earnest young women who are like genuinely trying to learn in spiritual circles, a lot of them have these intuitions about their spiritual teachers, like that excerpt I read out to you last night, just in confidence. We talked about how it's so interesting how many people have these intuitions, but then they ignore them, they deny them. But actually, it's impossible. It's really impossible to cheat anybody, because when somebody is hypocritical, or when somebody is not what they claim to be, when somebody, in other words, is a fraud, actually, you have to really convince yourself out of realizing that. It immediately apparently becomes clear to you. And then intuitively, like there's a kind of gut instinct also that a woman might feel, where she recognizes the warmth of truth, the light of spirituality, the holiness of purity, and naturally she will gravitate towards that. So the TLDR of this passage might be, women, trust your instincts. Actually, everyone trust your instincts. It's like Qui-Gon Jinn in episode 1, telling Anakin, don't think, trust your feelings. In a sense, you can talk yourself out of what you already know. You can try to justify someone or justify a spiritual community. But if you get some like red flag, if you like feel something, honor that. Because do you ever think that the divinity back of the woman can be cheated? It never was and never will be. So this is advice to spiritual aspirants, particularly young women who sometimes, unfortunately, all too often can find themselves in compromising situations in spiritual communities with unscrupulous leaders, but also unscrupulous members of the other community that maybe like don't really see things in this way. For such women, honor your instincts always. If something tells you to run the other way, do that. Don't worry, there are other spiritual communities that you can participate in. So be aware of the red flags and know that the dignity of a woman can never be cheated. And knowing that, spiritual teachers and members of spiritual communities should also remember that. To remember always that the woman is to be seen as the divine. And I think we can extend this beyond just the woman in terms of biology or in terms of sociology. We're extending this to mean everybody, every animal, every plant, every person, everything, every object is an incarnation of the divine. And it ought to be worshipped, not used. or rather, it ought to be given to, not taken from. That's the idea. So notice, we saw 3 episodes in this reading. The first episode was Sri Ramakrishna seeing the Divine Mother Kali as his mother, and then projecting that onto every woman that he met. Then the second episode was of him actually dressing up like a woman and affecting the mannerisms of the woman to kind of like sort of condition himself out of thinking that he was a man in order that he wouldn't feel that polarity, which is very natural between a male body and a female body in a heteronormative sense, but it's also very natural between a male body and another male body, or a female body and a female body, or a gender non-binary body with another male or female or gender non-binary body. Like, not to be heteronormative with any of this. Sri Ramakrishna in his own context felt himself to be a man, and naturally as a heterosexual man, he felt this kind of polarity towards members of the opposite sex. And weirdly, he did a sadhana that many of us consider quite weird, because he decided to like just stop being a man. I mean, it's easy, just like you are what you think. So he started to think of himself as a woman. And he dressed as a woman, and he spoke as a woman. He even, because of his power of his meditation, he even menstruated like a woman. Like, his whole body changed to reflect his inner conviction. This is a very powerful secret, actually, that gender is not in the body. And we know that, like, maybe sex is in the body, but that's not true. Sex and gender are both in the mind. And through a powerful force of will, one can identify with whatever one wants, and the body will reflect that sooner or later. Because what is the body but a reflex of the mind? So similarly, Sri Ramakrishna just decided to be a woman one day and felt like he was and became one. Fully. And there are beautiful stories where Mathur Babu was doing Durga Puja, one of Sri Ramakrishna's patrons, and he couldn't find Sri Ramakrishna anywhere. And there were these women who were fanning the deity during the time of the Arati. So later he asked, "Where is Baba? Where is Sri Ramakrishna? Where is our father?" And the girl said, "Didn't you know? He was here the whole time. He was fanning the deity." And Mathur is like, "What do you mean? It was a woman who was fanning a deity." And all the ladies were like, "Yeah, that's Sri Ramakrishna. She was fanning the deity, you know." That's the idea. So Sri Ramakrishna did this extreme sadhana whereby he effaced from himself all idea of being a man. In other words, this body consciousness that identifies with a male body, or even a psychological consciousness that identifies with a male ego. He just scrubbed himself free of all of those impressions. And in that way, he overcame his natural, instinctive, I guess you could say, sex drive. And not only that, that sex drive was not destroyed, it was transmuted, you could say, and turned into a kind of love for God. So now he identified as a woman, but then he felt a sexual attraction for Sri Krishna because he played the role of Radha, and Radha feels a deep romantic love for Sri Krishna. So it wasn't that he sublated his sexuality, he intensified it actually. And importantly, he directed it towards God in a way that seemed not to be natural to his sexuality and to his like birth gender and sex and whatnot. It's a very interesting thing. And not only that, after he did this sadhana, there's this case that Sri Ramakrishna, that Swami Vivekananda is pointing out, where he would just like throw himself onto the floor and cry tears whenever he would see a prostitute and just think, "Oh my God, you are the Holy Mother, you are the divine incarnate, the very woman that other people look down upon, that won't even go near." That woman he saw as the highest reality. So this idea that Sri Ramakrishna looked upon women as the goddess, and he looked upon the goddess as his own mother, that's something I think that many spiritual teachers can benefit from. Because usually, when a spiritual teacher falls, or when a spiritual community becomes compromised, often it's sex. Often it's that teacher like using their asymmetrical position of power in order to like sleep with their students or something like that. Or maybe it's not the teacher, and this is somewhat even more troubling. It's other people in that community who consider themselves to be in that teacher's inner circle, using the authority of the teacher in order to like use their asymmetry on other members of the community in order to sleep with them, you know. And that's the problem. And often all of this is justified under the guise of, "Oh, we're doing tantric sadhanas." But these tantric sadhanas are not for bhoga, they're for moksha, and in fact, they're highly specialized, highly refined techniques that are maybe best practiced between consenting adults, not something that you can practice within a spiritual community when there is already an asymmetry of power between teacher and student, or between inner circle and outer circle, and a kind of asymmetry that makes consent somewhat virtually impossible. So I think it's not that I'm saying that a spiritual teacher shouldn't date. I mean, I think ideally a spiritual teacher shouldn't, because always there's going to be that asymmetry. But I think even insofar as a spiritual teacher wants to date, I think that they should participate honestly with all of their emotions, and they should like enter into the world of romance. And I sincerely pray to the Divine Mother that everyone has mind-blowing sex and a super fulfilling and wonderful romantic relationship. Obviously, we want that for everybody. But my only sincere prayer is that spiritual teachers don't seek this sort of thing within their communities, because consent is kind of hard to establish there. Because if you are a spiritual teacher, naturally, in one sense, your students will look upon you as a role model, as a teacher, as a mentor. They will revere you. And insofar as you are a good spiritual teacher, you have to recognize that responsibility. And so you can't go out on a date with any of them. Like you can't treat them as romantic options, and neither should they see you as a romantic option. So I think as a spiritual teacher, you should make it very clear that you as a teacher are not romantically available. And more importantly, you should make it very clear to yourself that none of your students or members of your community are romantically available. I think this will save you so much trouble. And this is what we've learned from our teachers and the kind of ideal that we have in our community based on what we learned from our teachers, who really were very serious about this ideal. It's not to say sex is bad. Again, I'm not moralizing here. Sex is wonderful. You should have as much of it as you want. I'm not saying dating is problematic. All of these things are wonderful insofar as they can be done dharmically. That means between consenting adults. So like if two consenting adults or two or more consenting adults want to participate in some kind of quote unquote tantric sadhana, or just like any other like pleasure seeking endeavor for romance and sexuality, they ought to, but they should be intensely aware of the power dynamics that occur within a spiritual community. So generally we say it's best not to do it within the community. Insofar as you're going to do it at all, a spiritual aspirant should like maybe look for romantic prospects outside of their community. Especially a spiritual teacher should be careful not to date within their community. They should, if they want to date at all, look outside of their community where they can find a relationship that's maybe more symmetrical. So I think that's an important point that I really, really wanted to make. And you can see this was important to Sri Ramakrishna. It was very important that like sex or lust was not an energy that was entertained in the Sangha, in his teaching, and in his personality even. When you met him, you didn't feel that vibe from him. Because look, he did extreme sadhanas in order to efface the very idea from his psyche. So I mean, I'm not saying we have to go to this extent. I'm not saying we have to do the extreme sadhanas, but we can see what Sri Ramakrishna modeled for us. This, what do you call, absolute purity. So Swami Vivekananda puts it very beautifully. He says, he put it this way. He says, such purity is absolutely necessary if real spirituality is to be attained. These are Swami Vivekananda's words. And why are they his words? Because that's what he learned from Sri Ramakrishna. And because we're in the lineage of Sri Ramakrishna, we're holding on to his words and his teachings and his example. And now we know, because of that example, we should be very careful about especially teacher-student relationships. And so a good spiritual teacher is ideally, we say in the tantric world, married, because that means they're no longer romantically available. Like they're married. They have a bhairavi, like the applications are closed for that, and that's a good idea. And a lot of spiritual communities become somewhat problematic because even if that spiritual teacher is married, sometimes they start to take on quote unquote consorts outside of their marriage. So they might have like 7 consorts or something. And that's fine. Maybe that makes sense in the context of a certain tradition. And I'm not bashing it at all because again, it's all part of Ma's play and it's all the way that she explores. But if a spiritual community is to stay safe, that kind of thing is a bit dangerous because it's not clear to me that those quote unquote consorts can opt out. Insofar as they want the teaching, insofar as they want to participate in a spiritual community, I'm not sure that they're able to say no if a spiritual teacher of authority and power approaches them and makes a pass at them. And so I think it's incredibly unethical for a spiritual teacher especially to make a kind of romantic pass at any one of their students for any reason whatsoever, even if they say it's for some tantric sadhana. I think no, reserve that for your bhairavi, who ideally is someone that you met in the context of equal symmetrical relationship, And not only that, like I said, there's another problem here where it might not be the spiritual teacher, but that spiritual teacher's inner circle who use their position and their authority in the same way in order to assert asymmetry and in order to have dating prospects or romantic prospects or sexual prospects or something. So be careful with this sort of thing. And I know a lot of people who have found love in a spiritual sangha, and I wish that for everybody. I wish everybody finds love, but here's the thing. Sometimes when you date within the sangha, in many cases, it's perfectly fine. In fact, I know we all want to find a spouse who shares our spiritual ideals, and it makes sense to look for one within our spiritual community. That just makes sense. That's intuitive and natural. But you should also be aware that if you date within the sangha, like if you date another member of the sangha, especially if the two of you, as I was saying this morning, are what you call it, like lifelong members of the Sangha. Yeah, that's the phrase I used this morning. I'll be a bit more polite this evening. But if you're like the kind of person who dates within the Sangha, be forewarned, that relationship might end. And if it ends, we're in trouble. Because if that relationship ends in a messy way, then maybe one of you has to surrender custody of the Sangha. I've seen this happen a lot where the breakup is messy and then one member of that pair or that group can no longer come to the Sangha. They don't feel safe anymore in that satsang and they try to avoid it, or they have a joint custody battle where one of them comes only when the other one is not there and the other one comes only when the other one is not there. So sometimes I'll get text and people are and that's the thing, Sai is very right. Are there rules about this? Not really. And I think that's why, because in the New Age, or rather in spiritual communities all throughout time, there aren't clear rules. And that's why I'm trying to establish some now. I'm not saying they're rules, They're just suggestions. And the suggestion is spiritual teachers should not date their students. Under no circumstance should a spiritual teacher do this because the asymmetry of power is just too great and has to be considered. So can there even be consent in such a relationship? I'm not sure. Secondly, members of the inner circle should also be careful. Although they are not the teacher, they gain a kind of prestige by being close to the teacher or by being trusted by the teacher. So I've known many spiritual communities where the abuse doesn't actually come from the teacher. And in fact, the teacher doesn't even know that the abuse is happening, which is very sad and very scary. The abuse is actually coming from people who are using the teacher's name and then profiting off of those asymmetries. And again, there are no real rules around it, so there's no real way to regulate it. It just kind of happens. And more importantly, even outside of the inner circle and even outside of the teacher, like fellow members of the community, they can also get into trouble if they try to date one another or like seek romance in one another. Again, like I said, it's perfectly natural to do so because you want someone who shares your spiritual ideal. And you know, in one sense, it could go really well for you. Like you could be married to like your lifelong spiritual partner who you met in Sangha. Like that's wonderful. And it's also the case that even if you break up, you can be mature adults and you can understand that, like, look, we can both be in the same environment and learn these things and not make it weird, you know? But in many cases, unfortunately, as I have myself seen over these past few years, when the breakup comes, if it does come, usually one person gets exiled. And that's a very sad thing because that person, that community might have been very important to them. And so now they might not find another community which was as good a fit. Or what's worse, they can't come to their guru anymore because their guru is part of that community. And because they took Diksha with that guru, then when the breakup comes, they're no longer able to have access to their guru or access to their community. That's a very difficult karmic predicament to be in. So like to avoid all of that, put a fence around your spiritual life. Spiritual life is so sacred. It's very rare that you can find a community and find a teacher and find teachings. And so like that sort of thing should be protected, maybe even at all costs. So to protect it might mean like practicing a little bit of like what do you call it? Don't date within the Sangha kind of thing. It's almost like you could say kind of incestuous in the sense that members of a Sangha consider themselves to be brothers and sisters. Like I was saying this morning, it can be very culty if you actually say that, like, brother, please pass me the salt. Sister, I think it's time that you had your next confession. Like it can be cool. Like when you wear big robes and you say brother and sister. In fact, the friars of, you know, England, like Friar Tuck, like I was saying this morning, that word friar, it means like wandering mendicant usually, like somebody in the Franciscan or Dominican order. But probably the word friar comes from the frater, Latin word frater, or the French frère, which means brother. So we say Friar Tuck, we're saying brother Tuck. And that's the idea. Like I should look upon him as father and brother, not as a romantic partner. Because to enter into a sexual or romantic relationship with that friar would be equivalent to entering into a romantic or sexual relationship with one's own brother or one's own father, which, you know, in some cultures is not problematic, but in most cultures I think is somewhat frowned upon. So I'm not saying that these taboos are real. I'm not saying that this is a moral issue. I'm not like legalizing or regulating anything. Far from it. You guys, everyone should do whatever they want and everyone should indulge and enjoy their life in whatever way they want. I'm not moralizing here. I'm just saying in terms of being a spiritual aspirant in a spiritual community, you might want to consider dating outside of that community just to protect your time in that community. So this is like kind of our open letter maybe to spiritual communities all over the world, to spiritual teachers, to spiritual aspirants. You will save yourself a lot of heartache probably if you don't consider yourself a romantic prospect for your students, if you don't consider your students romantic prospects, and if you don't consider one another romantic prospects. And you know what? This is not that strange of an idea because it's already the standard that we practice within secular fields of service. Like say, for instance, a teacher student in high school. Obviously, that's not okay because of like, you know, the child cannot consent by virtue of being like, even if she's 17, 18, 19, even if he's like 19, 18 years old like that, even then the teacher is much older and that asymmetry of age sometimes can be a problem. Not always. Obviously, I'm not saying like, I'm not being ageist here. Like you could be a consenting adult and you could be in a relationship with someone who's much, much older. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying right now that child is not yet at the age of consent, which I know is something that gets negotiated throughout different cultures and different times. But like, I think it's good that we as a culture don't think it's okay for teachers in high school to date their high school students, right? Like we have a strong boundary against that. And there's like sensitivity trainings that teachers have to go through in order to protect that boundary, right? That's not too strange. And that's like not asking a lot. Then take, for instance, college situations. Now everyone is presumably a consenting adult, unless you have like the genius 14-year-old that ends up in college, you know, because they're like a math genius or something. But like most of the people there are like probably, you know, 18 and above or like 20 and above. Their age of consent, no problem. But you know what? Even then, a TA or a professor should not be dating the student. This rule gets broken a lot, unfortunately, but it's I think an important cultural standard because the TA might not be that much older than you. In fact, they might not have that much power over you, but they still have some. They still grade your papers, maybe. They're still kind of like in the inner circle of a college professor who might actually have a lot of power over your future just by virtue of writing resumes or grading your papers or something, or just by virtue of being in a mentor role. And given that, it's generally frowned upon for a college student to like, you know, go out with their professor. And generally, professors are taught not to date their college students. They have to date outside of their workplace, and they have to maintain a professionalism in the working environment. I think that's something we already like as a culture are okay with and we defend in the environment, like a secular environment of a college classroom. Then what to say of a doctor and a patient or a psychiatrist and a patient? That's a sacred relationship where there's like confidentiality, and in that relationship, it's incredibly frowned upon for there to be like any kind of romantic sort of thing because of the asymmetry of power, because of how much trust and intimacy is required of that doctor or of that psychiatrist. And so they have to be professional, you see. In that service setting, which is a very secular setting, we have no problem with this standard. And yet, when it comes to spiritual life, which is also a very important service, which is very much like being a doctor or a psychiatrist, or at the very least, very much like being a college professor, how come these things fly out the window? Isn't that interesting? Like somehow in like our spiritual communities, we don't hold to these standards. Standards that are not a lot to ask, actually. Standards that we are happy to defend in secular service environments. Do you see? So this happens a lot, like in every community, whether it's like a shaman administering ayahuasca, like that's also a situation in which you have to be very responsible. You're like administering ayahuasca, and I've heard these stories too often, unfortunately, then you have the gall to like make a pass at someone. Hooray, they're intoxicated. Like, what to say of the teacher-student relationship, but like there's not a space in which consent can be established. Therefore, what we're getting from these three instances, when Thakur is like wearing the sari and pretending to be a woman or actually becoming a woman, stories of how he looks upon God as a divine mother and how he projects that onto every woman that he meets. And also this final bit where Swamiji is saying, we hear in the West about worshipping women, but this is usually for a youth and beauty. This man meant by worshipping women that to him every woman's face was that of the blissful mother and nothing but that. I myself have seen this man standing before those women whom society could not touch and falling at their feet bathed in tears, saying, Mother, in one form thou art in the street, and in another form thou art the universe. I salute thee, Mother, I salute thee. Think of the blessedness of that life from which all carnality has vanished. It's really beautiful because, in the life of Swami Vivekananda, obviously, he's very handsome, very charismatic, very powerful young man, and giving these powerful speeches. And so there's a beautiful little reflection from one of the women who were there in the Parliament of World Religions, a Miss Blodgett. She was an older woman, and she saw after Swamiji gave his first speech at the Parliament of World Religions, like a swarm of young women like flooded the front of, like they all like kind of plunged forward to try to get closer to him. And then she said, "My boy, if you can resist this onslaught, then you are a god indeed." Because she saw like who can resist, like all these young women are throwing themselves at him, and people would write, they would say whenever women would speak to him, sometimes they'd be red in the cheeks and obviously like very smitten with his power and with his personality. And many people made him marriage proposals, do you know? Like many women said to Swamiji, if you would only marry me, I would put you out of want forever. Like wealthy women were not only like pledging themselves to him for like all eternity, but offering to give him mansions and houses and all of that. And Swamiji wrote back, in one letter to Swami Brahmananda. It's a beautiful letter. He addresses Swami Brahmananda as the inseparable beloved of his heart, Anitya Hridayeshu. And he says there, do you think I would have been able to withstand the beauty of fairies? The word he used in Bengali was apsara. And do you think I would have been able to withstand all these hundreds and thousands of rupees given to me if not for the grace of Sri Ramakrishna? So in that letter, he seems to be saying that the charms of the fairy-like beauties of America and of London and of India had no effect on him. Although they were like apsaras, beautiful and pure like the icicle of Diana's temple. Like even then, he could not feel any attraction for them because Thakur was protecting his mind. So he makes that claim. He's like, look, if I didn't have the grace of God, who knows what would have happened? I would have been ensnared by the charms of beautiful women. But then he said, no, I was able to resist by virtue of Thakur's grace. And then he would say hundreds and thousands of dollars were thrown at me to get him to do things I didn't want to do. But he didn't take that money. Because again, but he said in that letter to Swami Brahmananda that it's by the grace of the Divine Mother, by Sri Ramakrishna's grace alone, that he was able to stay clear of lust and greed. So this idea of sexuality and lust, again, not to moralize, there's nothing wrong with it. One should enjoy it to their heart's content. Just in spiritual life, be careful. Expect more of your teachers. And teachers, practice professionalism in the environment. And that doesn't mean you become cold and withholding and keep everyone at arm's distance. No, you love fully, but love everyone as a sister, as a brother, as a child, as a mother. Love everyone as God. And seeing God as a divine mother is the best help here. Or you can take the other approach where, as a spiritual teacher, don't identify with whatever sexuality you are or whatever sex you are or whatever gender you are. Just think of yourself as a voice, as a spirit, and relate to other people in that way. Don't speak to others as a person. Rather, try to be an impersonal voice for the benefit and good of all. So that's some advice to spiritual teachers that we heard from our teachers to stay safe. The other thing is money. So the other thing that we learned in this reading is the importance of being free of money, of greed. So usually spirituality, if it's not about sex, then it very quickly becomes about money. So then, it's like, I'll charge you $432. And then you can come to my 5-week workshop on the Mahavidyas or something like that. Is that spirituality? Well, maybe I get it. Like, you need to have money to run the ashrama. Like, you need to feed all the people coming to the puja. You got to buy the flowers. You've got to purchase the food in order to cook for everyone. Like, obviously an ashrama needs money, no doubt. But it's one thing to receive donations, which you trust will come from the providence of the Divine Mother. It's quite another thing to price gouge and to make your workshop so inanely expensive. And then for what? And oftentimes the content is not even that rich or that deep, but it's fluff. But like I said earlier, like stretched out over a period of time, and then you charge people a lot of money for it, and then you lock it behind a paywall. That's problematic because we know that in our tradition, it's very important that spirituality be given to all for free, as long as somebody is sincere. Now that doesn't mean a gurukula doesn't need donations. Obviously, that will have to come, but it doesn't come as a precondition. You see, the condition for receiving spiritual knowledge is not money, and in fact, a guru cannot even ask for a sum. Like, the guru must be content with whatever dakshina they get. They can't be like, oh, you want a mantra? Okay, $500. You can't do that. It's literally against our shastra. And so Sai is right to point out that there are places in our tantras where these things are said. They're called the charya pada. Tantras usually have, jnana pada, kriya pada, and tell you how to build a temple and how to do the daily puja. There's a yoga pada that tells you how to chant mantras and might even give yantras and mantras and dhyanas. But there's also, importantly, in a tantra, a section on how to conduct yourself. And in many of these, they say, look upon women as the Divine Mother, or whenever you get together with your Guru Bhais and Guru Bhaginis, perform a puja. Like, there are specific pujas, Naimitika pujas, like when your Guru visits the house, do a puja, or when a member of your Guru's family comes, do a puja, like stuff like that. There are these rules. And sometimes they're kind of silly, like wear all red or wear all black or something like that. But other times they're very important, like don't sell spiritual knowledge. Give it away for free. And let the donations come as they will. Now, the only person who's able to do this, arguably, is a person whose livelihood doesn't depend on spiritual teaching. And you can't blame anybody. They have children to raise. College is so expensive. There's medical bills. Maybe they're supporting a community back at home. Like, you can't blame people for charging, but that's because their motive is to enrich themselves through spiritual teaching, which is, again, not a problem. Just be aware of this, because in our tradition we say, the best kind of spiritual teacher does not need to make a living from spirituality. Rather, they're just trusting in the providence of God and living simply off whatever donation they can get. They've already renounced the desire for material comfort. They're sadhus, but in the true sense of the word. Just because they wear orange doesn't mean they're a sadhu. And just because they don't wear orange doesn't mean they're not a sadhu. Like, a person who truly does this for its own sake, out of love alone, without trying to get any financial compensation for it, that person is probably the best kind of spiritual teacher, because they won't use you for money. So either spiritual teachers are looking upon you as a romantic prospect, or they're looking upon you as a business prospect. And so as a teacher, we should be careful not to look upon people in that way. And as a student, we should be aware that we don't become a romantic or business prospect for somebody. That attitude of money can also really ruin the bhava, Quincy Jones once said, and the other day, Quincy Jones' tour manager was here and she confirmed this. Quincy Jones once said something beautiful. He said, whenever you talk about money, God walks out of the room. Now, Swamiji was collecting money for his lectures, no doubt. Like, as he was lecturing, he sometimes got $900 after giving one lecture like that. But you know what he would do? He would always come home and pour it all out into Mrs. Leon's lap and have her count all the money. He didn't like to touch it. He was very weird around it, but he knew that he needed to collect it in order to start his Sangha back home. He had a mission. Swami Vivekananda wanted to start the Ramakrishna mission, and he knew that he needed to like generate funds in America in order to be able to do it back in India. So he was interested in money, obviously, but like not for personal enrichment. Because once he got this money, he immediately gave it to Swami Brahmananda and had nothing to do with it. And when he wanted to use the ferry, he would like request some money in order to be able to use the ferry. And Swami Brahmananda was like horrified. He was like, bro, this is your money. You made it through your labor lecturing in the United States. Why are you asking me for 2 rupees to be able to take the ferry? He's like, just take, it's your money. And Swamiji didn't feel so. It's very interesting. Even though he was taking money, lots of money in order to be able to fund Bellarmine, he genuinely didn't feel like it was his money. Because even when he was back in India, living in the ashrama that was almost uniquely funded by his efforts in America, efforts that would eventually cost him his life, even then, he asked for 2 rupees to be able to take the ferry. He didn't feel like it was his money. It's a very, very interesting thing. So money is a problem, sex is a problem, but only in spiritual life. Outside, just do whatever you want. Like make money, be an honest business person, dharmically try your best to sell your product, sell malas. I don't know. But like in spiritual life, be careful. So we say there's nothing wrong with sex, there's nothing wrong with money. There's maybe only a problem when sex and money are the goal and spiritual life is the excuse. So ultimately we would say, and this is advice to spiritual teachers, it's good to have a day job. You know, it's good to have some other means of income so that you don't treat your spiritual teaching itself as your sole means of income. Now, many people will reject this. They'll say, no, but it's my swadharma. Hare, why do you think that you need to make abundance out of your swadharma? You're being sold some kind of self-help new age delusion that somehow you're owed thousands and thousands of dollars just because you're doing your swadharma. Our ancestors, the Brahmanas of old, they performed their swadharmas and many of them died in abject poverty. And it's not because they had a scarcity mentality. It's because they were against the idea of collecting money for spiritual teaching. It would be equivalent to whoring out your mother, for instance. That's how we felt about knowledge. Something sacred should not be sold, should not be demeaned and turned into a commodity. You know, the sacred should not be bartered. That idea. So that's why Christ freaked out when he went into the temple and he saw that people were doing business in his name. He was like, there can be no commerce in my Father's house. So yes, you can set up structures like we do, for instance, to incentivize donations and like have a pathway for people to donate, but there is no financial barrier. Like there should not be any financial barrier between you and the knowledge that you want to learn. This knowledge can only be given freely from the free to the free. And more importantly, if you are sincerely like interested in donating, you will. And by the grace of certain individuals who are moved in this way, who have the resources, everyone else benefits. So that's the traditional Gurukula idea. A patron will sponsor the Gurukula, and then everyone else gets to benefit from that patronage. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing to be able to sponsor. And so the gift of donating and the gift of being able to support a spiritual community is something that's only possible when things aren't like a certain cost. Now, I know it can give a lot of like reassurance. Like it's nice to know what things cost, because if you don't, you get kind of uncomfortable. You're like, oh, I feel like I should, donate, but I don't really know how much to donate. All that kind of thing can come. And again, like if you're worried about it, just don't worry about it. Don't donate in that case. Just come for free. Like if you are in your head about how much to donate, then don't donate. But if you like feel moved, then you'll give whatever amount that you feel moved to give. It's not a big deal, because money, the energy of money, is not welcome in the spiritual space. You can see Sri Ramakrishna effaced this idea of material wealth from his mind also. He literally couldn't touch coins. So he had effaced all lust and he had effaced all greed. So for a spiritual teacher, maybe some advice is date outside of your community. Be aware of the power asymmetries, but also maybe have a day job or have some other way to make income. Don't treat your spiritual life as your primary source of enrichment, but also if you're going to, be a sadhu. In other words, don't expect very much. What comes, good, manage it well, don't squander it. But importantly, like just like trust in God, trust in providence. Just see what happens. Live like the wind, uncaught by any net. So if you want to do this in the way that our ancestors did, in the way that our teachers did, it's good to be a sadhu. Very hard to do that, of course, if you have children to provide for, but not really, actually, because what your children might miss out in terms of like a luxurious life, they might get instead as a present parent, which many, unfortunately, rich children miss out on. A present parent full of love and joy, who's able to give them the true treasure of dharma, the true treasure of shastra, and not the baubles and trinkets of material life. So I don't know, maybe such a person might not start a family, or even if they do, they'll have a very simple family. And that's the way that the brahmanas of our culture are. They have very simple lives, very simple families, because their treasure is in spirit. They have not laid up for moth and rust all these baubles and trinkets. Their treasure is not in that which corrupts. Where thieves break in and steal. Their treasure is in the eternal. So having said that, there's another episode that I think we should summarize the reading with, and it's this. The pariahs, like Sri Ramakrishna, in order to scrub out the notion of caste, went and like scrubbed, literally to scrub out the notion of caste and pride. He used his hair to literally scrub the latrine of the pariah, the untouchable, in order to overcome this idea that he's better or worse than everybody. So I think the final thing I'll say maybe is this: it's not just sex or money, it's also pride. And of course, with pride comes like power and politics and whatnot. But it's this idea that we're better than everyone else. So spiritual teachers should be very careful, because if you do this, a kind of narcissism will creep up on you. Mark my words, be careful. If you sit in front of people for hours at a time and talk to them, and they're all just sitting there listening and looking at you, you will sooner or later come to think that you're the shit, right? Like sooner or later, like it's inevitable. It's like you'll start to think like, oh, maybe I'm worth being listened to. Or maybe I'm great, or maybe I'm cool, or maybe I am the guru or something, forgetting that God alone is the guru. So very soon, you start to act this like role of being a diva, of being like this like rock star who expects service from others. But the role of the guru is to be the servant of others, not to like take service from them. So suddenly you expect seva, and you can be a tyrant when you don't get it. So there are many people in this position of spiritual teacher who act all peaceful and like, we're all one man kind of thing on stage. But the moment they go off stage, they start shouting and cussing. And I have a documentary in mind, but I'm not going to mention it because I don't want to speak ill of anybody. But there are people like this who, the moment the camera is off them, they abuse their inner circle, the people who work for them. They shout, they beat. Sometimes physical violence is involved, but short of physical violence, obviously there's like a lot of verbal abuse and things like that, because they need things to be a certain way, and they're inflated. Their ego is inflated. There's a narcissism that invariably creeps in. In fact, arguably, you have to be somewhat of a narcissist to begin with to like do this kind of spiritual teaching kind of thing. Like on some level, maybe there's an unaddressed desire for attention. All of those things should be like addressed. That you as an individual stepping into the world of spiritual instruction should ask yourself what your motive is. Do you just need to be listened to? Do you just need to feel like you belong? Do you need to get this sense of power over others? Have you in your life felt powerless and now you feel like this is your outlet to assert yourself? Be very careful, because all of these things throughout your career, if indeed it's a long career, will eventually rear up their ugly heads and bite you. So you have to be doing this for the right reason, meaning you should not think of yourself as better or like the guru. You should remember that God alone is the guru, and your job is just to serve others. And those of you who are spiritual aspirants, it's perfectly fine to look upon your teacher as a guru, but don't idolize them as if they are some deity. I mean, they're a human being too. You can look upon them as God, but remember, look through them, as it were. Look past them to the deity that they represent or to the lineage that they're standing for. Like, be careful and be responsible with the way that you treat your teachers. And teachers should be very careful and responsible so that they don't look down on their students or feel like they're better or something. That's why this teaching is important. What Sri Ramakrishna did with the pariah, that's very important. Because a spiritual teacher should hold themselves in the position of the servant. And therefore, anytime this like pride creeps in, you must check it. And you must say, no, 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 I'm not better than anybody. In fact, we're either all equal, or better yet, they're all divine incarnations of the goddess. So I must hold myself always in the position of servant. That way you can protect a little bit against haughtiness or pride or thinking yourself better than everyone. So notice, if you put all of this together, you have three very good rules. One, don't see your students as romantic prospects. Two, don't see them as financial or business prospects. And three, treat everyone equally, or better yet, see them all as God and hold yourself always in the position of servant in every interaction with everyone. Speak ill of no one and always try to see the best in people and bring that out. These are the three, I think, general rules that we can, not rules, but suggestions that we can make for spiritual teachers. And for spiritual aspirants, one, don't allow yourself to become a romantic prospect, unless, of course, you're fully consenting and like there's obviously like there are communities for that too. But insofar as that you don't want that, don't allow that. Don't stand for that. And turn the other way if you think that atmosphere is emerging and that's not what you want. Secondly, be careful not to be sold to. Don't become somebody's like marketing scheme. And thirdly, this is important. Be always aware like what the teacher's real character is like, and notice if there's pride or arrogance or something like that. Doesn't mean there won't be good teachers. Sometimes a great teacher can also be very complicated, prideful, arrogant individual. I'm not saying like reject them as teachers, but also just like note that, and ideally be careful of big egos, because sometimes, big egos like this, when they don't get their way, they sometimes spin out. It's like you don't want to hedge your bets, and be careful of like that kind of person. So anyway, that the third thing is kind of harder, and maybe it's more for the spiritual teacher than for the spiritual aspirant. But generally, these are three rules. Now comes the most important rule, the fourth rule, and I'll close out with this. This is something really beautiful. And so This rigorous, unsullied purity came into the life of that man. So I'm reading again from Swami Vivekananda. All the struggles which we have in our lives were past for him. Now, here, his hard-earned jewels of spirituality, for which he had given 3/4 of his life, were now ready to be given to humanity. And then began his mission. His teaching and preaching were peculiar. In our country, a teacher is a most highly venerated person. He is regarded as God himself. We have not even the same respect for our father and mother. Father and mother give us our body, but the teacher shows us the way to salvation. We are his children. We are born in the spiritual line of the teacher. All Hindus come to pay respect to an extraordinary teacher. They crowd around him. And here was such a teacher. But the teacher had no thought whether he was to be respected or not. He had not the least idea that he was a great teacher. He thought that it was the mother who was doing everything and not him. Very important. So a spiritual teacher should always feel like they are not the teacher, that mother alone is doing everything, that they can of themselves do nothing. So he was not interested in being respected, and we shouldn't be either. We who are spiritual teachers should not expect respect or reverence. Who cares? Mother alone is worthy of respect and reverence. And if anybody respects or reveres you, it's only because they're respecting and revering the mother through you. Don't take it personally. Now, that was his idea about work. If any good comes from my lips, it is the mother who speaks. What have I to do with it? And to the day of his death, he never gave up this idea about work. This man sought no one. His principle was first form character, first earn spirituality, and results will come of themselves. His favorite illustration was when the lotus opens, the bees come of their own accord to seek the honey. So let the lotus of your character be full blown and the results will follow. This is a great lesson to learn. Swamiji says, this is a great lesson to learn. So we shouldn't need to look for students. We just shouldn't seek anyone out. You know, some people sometimes they're like, oh my God, like I hope the algorithm picks me up. Don't worry, relax. Just do your thing. And if you really have the goods, if really your flower is fully bloomed, the fragrance will not fail to attract bees who have come for that honey. And arguably, you might be a very rarefied flower where only very few bees of discernment can come. I don't expect you'll have a big community. But if you're truly bloomed, no doubt, people must come. The genuine spiritual seeker cannot resist the pull towards a genuinely realized being. But look, one must have some spirituality first. We're not saying you have to be fully realized. After all, it's a continuing journey. Your realization can deepen over the years, but you have to have something. You know, you have to first earn character. You have to have these hard-won jewels of spirituality to be able to distribute. This takes us back to that point that we made at the beginning of the lecture. If you would be a reformer, Swamiji says, you must actually have something to give. You must have some kind of method or some kind of content. But that's not in terms of concept. It's in terms of life. And that can only come through sadhana. So now one last piece here, and this is even more important. This is perhaps the most refined and subtle thing that we're going to hear. My master taught me this lesson hundreds of times, yet I often forget it. Few understand the power of thought. If a man goes into a cave, shuts himself in, and thinks one really great thought and dies, that thought will penetrate the walls of that cave, vibrate through space, and at last permeate the whole human race. Such is the power of thought. Be in no hurry, therefore, to give your thoughts to others. First, have something to give. Now, Swamiji has a very specific story in mind where he touched his brother disciple's knee and transmitted power. And then Swami, after he did that, Sri Ramakrishna called him into the room and said, what is this? Spending before you accumulate? In other words, giving away before you have something to give? Like, you have no spirituality. You haven't done the work. You haven't earned any hard-won jewels of spirituality. You haven't formed the character. Your lotus is not bloomed. And yet you are calling out to the bees to come and sip honey? That's tragic. You yourself are thirsty and then you're promising a drink to others. So what Swami Vivekananda had to learn through Sri Ramakrishna is that first you have to have something to give. He alone teaches who has something to give. For teaching is not talking. Teaching is not imparting doctrines. It is communicating. Spirituality can be communicated just as really as I can give you a flower. This is true in the most literal sense. This idea is very old in India and finds illustration in the West in the theory, in the belief of apostolic succession. Therefore, first make character. That is the highest duty you can perform. Know truth for yourself, and there will be many to whom you can teach it afterwards. They will all come. This was the attitude of my master. He criticized no one. For years I lived with that man, but never did I hear those lips utter one word of condemnation for any sect. He had the same sympathy for all sects. He had found the harmony between them. A man may be intellectual or devotional or mystic or active. See, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga. The various religions represent one or the other of these types. Yet it is possible to combine all the four in one man, and this is what future humanity is going to do. That was his idea. He condemned no one, but saw the good in all. So I'm gonna pause there and close up now and just say this. The reason we condemn others is because we're insecure. We don't have anything. We don't have anything to give. So we're threatened when we see other people and we see other communities. But if we were really abundant, if we were really secure in our spirituality, we wouldn't find fault with anybody. We only see in others what's there in us. So a person who's always saying, that man is so lustful, that woman is so greedy, that person is so prideful, that person is wrong, and that person is wrong, that person is probably lustful, greedy, prideful, and wrong. Because we only really see in others what's there in us. So a spiritual teacher, out of a spirit of generosity, what in philosophy we call the principle of charity, should generally feel like everyone is right, everyone is fine, each according to their own place, everyone is valid. And so this man, Sri Ramakrishna, never condemned anyone. And he was able to see every religion within a wider unity and understand the role that every religion had to play. My guru is the exact same way. I have never once heard any note of condemnation come from him. Once my mother tried to get him to say something nasty about a particular guru that my mother had a problem with. And you know what he said? We were all sitting, my mother said something, and then my guru said, no, ma, like, he's needed also for people along the path in a different stage of the path. Like, he's helping many people also, and for those people, he is the right guru. He may not be for you, but for those people, he is helping. You know, like that. He would even go so far as to defend, not naively and not gullibly, but still with a large heart, defend those people that others would find problematic. Heck, he defends me all the time. Once somebody brought up that we offer wine to Kālī in our pujas. They were like, oh, you know, Nishant, he's giving wine to Ma Kālī in the puja, thus implying that we are some crazy orgiastic bacchanalia type sadhus. I mean, like, nothing could be further from the truth. And some people are even disappointed when they find that out. But, you know, what my guru said immediately was, oh, whatever, we also do that in our Hollywood puja. Like that, he's willing to defend me no matter what. And that's the way that he won me with his love. Like, I noticed that he loves me unconditionally and he fights for me every moment and people are always slandering. Obviously they will. Whenever there's a spiritual community, wherever there's a spiritual teacher, whenever there's anyone anywhere in the world trying to do anything, necessarily all the dogs will bark. People will slander. So people have been slandering me left, right, and for all sorts of things. But Gurudeva has always defended me. Because even if he were to believe all of those things, which he doesn't, he wouldn't actually have a problem with it. Because he knows that there's a place for everybody in this spiritual world. So not condemning anybody, not gossiping, this is important. So this is a subtle thing. Thought is very powerful. Spirituality is not doctrines. It's not words. It's the transmission of thought as literally and as really as passing a flower from one person to another. That transmission of spirituality is all in the mind. It has to do with what we call ojas, a kind of spiritual energy, which can easily be dissipated with gossip. So if you are to be a spiritual aspirant, and if you are to be a spiritual teacher, and if you take nothing else away from this discussion, take just this. Don't gossip. Be very careful of this thing. Don't gossip about others, other communities, other teachers, your own teacher, your own community. Of course, you can talk and share your experiences in order to be mindful and to like corroborate evidence and to make better decisions. But you know what I mean. Gossip has a different kind of energy. So yeah, like how do you avoid gossip when other people do? I know people like Swami Vivekananda. This really impressed me. When people start to gossip, he literally just gets up and walks away. He just has a boundary around that. And people have learnt that boundary, and so they don't gossip around him. Because around him, people are gossiping. But the moment he hears any kind of gossip, Swami Bhajananda just gets up and walks away. I really learned a lot from that. In fact, when people start bringing up political conversations, because he's a monk and because monks are not supposed to be involved in politics, he literally just gets up and walks away. And he doesn't care. Like, if you think he's rude or whatever, he doesn't care. Like, that's his boundary, and he's going to protect his hygiene, and so he's just going to walk away. Another strategy that people use is they elevate the conversation. So, you know, a compass always points north. So no matter where you turn, the compass will always turn north. So if somebody starts gossiping and something, you can yourself just kind of like take the conversation somewhere else and you can start talking about something. And yes, obviously, we have no problem with people gossiping because that would be hypocritical to say, don't gossip, and then to gossip about people gossiping. Obviously, we forgive them. But that doesn't mean we can't also learn to bow from a distance. So you'll be like, good, this is wonderful. This is a way that you can enjoy this world. But I myself, and especially if you're a spiritual teacher, should not do it. Why? Because it compromises your power, literally your spiritual power, the power of your thoughts, which you have cultivated through a lifetime of sadhana. So the final closing remark here is this. The most important thing about this talk, about this presentation is the following. Spirituality is not words. It's not even character. I mean, obviously it's character, but it's about something deeper, of which words and character and life are but an external reflex. It's about spirit, spirituality. Who would have thought? It's about spirit. And spirit is a transmission from one person to another, and a lifetime of spiritual practice is required. So as a final note here, it's like if you would be a spiritual teacher, do intense spiritual practices, not just for yourself, but for your community. You have to have something to give. And more importantly, be careful how you spend that energy which you generate through spiritual practice. You can easily dissipate it through gossip and other kinds of dissipating things. So as a spiritual practitioner, you have to be responsible with your energy. And by energy, I mean thought. The power of thought. One good thought will penetrate the walls of the cave, permeate humanity, and be a blessing to everyone. So don't just think the only way to help someone is to talk to them or to like teach them something. In fact, the best way to be a spiritual teacher is sometimes just to be quiet, just to sit in the cave and close your eyes and go deep, because that alone is a teaching to the world. That alone transmits a kind of vibration that will uplift the entire humanity. So don't be fooled by clever words or charismatic personality. Don't be fooled by an outfit. Don't even be fooled by the illusion of an institution that seems to have it all together. Ultimately, you as a sincere aspirant will know. You will know when you come into the presence of real spirituality, because you will feel it. And it might surprise you even. It's an absolutely tangible yet invisible force of transmission that occurs between the aspirant and the teacher. And for teachers, that's the goods. That's what really matters. And for aspirants, that's what you must really look for, being careful to avoid all the other stuff. It's perfectly possible to have this transmission and still have all this other stuff too. I've met many people who were in communities that were really problematic, but they could not deny that they got some kind of transmission. Because you know what? A dirty broom can sweep the floor also. A broken wire can also electrocute you. But you know, it's dangerous, obviously. Because even if that juice is there, sometimes, you know, all the other stuff can be a deal breaker. So be discerning, obviously, when approaching spiritual communities. Be aware of sex, money, power, pride. And of course, spiritual teachers, we have to be very careful about these kinds of things. Okay, so all of this is easy to talk. A very big ideal has just been presented. And it's easy for me, absolutely easy for me to just like say all of these things. Now, the real test will come in living them. So to live according to these things is obviously the great ideal of my life. Like I'm praying that by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, we as a community can live up to these ideals, to be a genuine spiritual space in which we don't look upon one another as romantic prospects or business prospects, where there is no hierarchy, no sense of pride or power, no asymmetry. Like we don't see ourselves as higher or lower. Like we can all just be children of God together, looking at God, who is the one true Guru. So when we come and sit, it shouldn't be me sitting and then everyone sitting around. It should be all of us sitting, looking at God, looking at Ma, looking at the altar. We should learn from Swamiji, from Sri Ramakrishna, from our gurus, from our lineage, and no one person should have a cult of personality or anything like that. So having said all of that, these are the ideals that I am aspiring to as a spiritual teacher in a spiritual community. But it's not something that I can do on my own. That's a very important point that I have to make. It takes a village. It literally really does. That everyone has to vibrate and resonate on that same level. They have to agree to some extent to that ideal. They have to like be aligned, if you will, to the same goal. And insofar as we are, we all help each other. Should any one of us forget this ideal, we can remind one another. And more importantly, by embodying it in our own lives, we become an inspiration to others. That maybe there is a space in which genuine spirituality can be transmitted, not only in words, but in spirit. In that space, one can feel safe and not at all like a prospect of both romance and finance or pride or ego. And to create such a space, that is the ideal. That is one of the main goals. And it's through sadhana alone that it can be accomplished. So Swami Bhajanananda in one place said, "This house is built on sadhana." I thought, what a beautiful phrase. The lineage of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Swami Vivekananda, it's a lineage of sadhana. Sadhana, sadhana, sadhana. So prioritize your own spiritual practice, and through that practice generate power, and through that power freely and willingly give to all, knowing them all to be incarnations of the Divine Mother. Look upon them as God incarnate and serve, serve, serve. Let us all, each and every one of us, give our lives to this great mission of representing this great lineage to the best of our ability, with integrity, with compassion, with discernment. May this be protected by Sri Ramakrishna. May our minds be protected. May this be an offering. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Jai Ma.